Monday, May 5th, 2014. Irene. It was Jason's voice. I was sleeping. My mind was playing with me. I won't lie, I was thinking, and the thoughts were pretty indecent about Jason, but I was at a nude beach with Oscar, my husband of 17 years. It should be noted that Oscar was completely naked. I was wearing only bikini panties like I had been for the entire 5 years that we visited this beach. No, I couldn't have heard that delicious, smooth baritone sound of Jason's voice. Jason was handsome. The girls in the next office all said so, and I didn't mind. I knew everything about handsome men after all. I married one. When we met, I was 24 and a virgin, and when we got married, I was 25 and still a virgin. I know it sounds incredible, but I had a very strict upbringing. Oscar was everything a girl could dream of. Handsome, smart, kind, polite, witty, and a great dancer. Ideal husband. Although I was a virgin, Oscar admitted that he had more than a dozen partners. I was looking forward to our wedding night with my experienced, handsome husband. I was sorely disappointed. It quickly became clear why he had so many partners. Handsome. Yes, definitely. All the other qualities I listed above. Yes, too. But in bed, he completely failed. Its size was shorter than my index finger, which is less than 70 mm. On top of that, he was no thicker than a finger, but otherwise he was a wonderful husband, and I loved him with all my soul, so I put up with the disappointments of the night, waiting until he fell asleep to quietly pleasure myself. The only experience I had with sex was the vicarious pleasure of listening to the weekend escapades of young, single women in the office until I became a manager. More than 7 years ago, he shared his fantasy with me. He imagined how I would be completely satisfied in every way with another man or men. If he could watch, so much the better. This thought attracted me, I admit, but it was completely wrong. It went against my marriage vows and everything I had been taught. I categorically dismissed it, telling him that as a fantasy it is acceptable and he can enjoy it as much as he wants, but it will never become a reality. We live in Barcelona, a beautiful city on the coast of Catalonia, Spain. There are 4.5 kilometers of sandy beach with several areas specifically designed for nudists or nudists. They are quite popular. We started visiting one of them regularly soon after Oscar told me about his fantasy. Apparently, he was hoping that I would realize that there were many men with impressive assets out there to choose from and would change my mind. I wore big sunglasses so my husband wouldn't see me looking around at the equipment. I had no intention of taking a lover for the reasons stated above, but there was nothing wrong with looking. I watched and enjoyed it, but that was all. Shortly after this, I was late at work and noticed a magazine on Elena's desk. This was not the usual glossy magazine you find in stores. I was curious and took it. I looked through it. It was essentially a sex guide. A guide about what every girl should know about sex before marriage. One particular remark caught my attention: female arousal. Instantly, the comments of Mrs. Delgado, a widow for 6 years, that her new lover knew how to use his hands and mouth made sense, beautiful sense. The article also talked about self-satisfaction. This was wrong, so wrong against church rules. My mother threatened dire consequences if the girl followed this path. Her duty is to satisfy her husband's needs and not to indulge in her own pleasures. I eagerly read the entire article and spent another 30 minutes reading the rest. I was tempted to copy the entire magazine, but I realized that it would be difficult to hide it from my husband and even more difficult to find time to read. I took a photo of every page with my phone, including the advertisement, and carefully placed the magazine back on Elena's desk. I had my own fantasy, a collection of men's sizes, and a way of self-satisfaction. I attached the chosen size to the mental image of my husband and could satisfy myself whenever my husband was not around or he was sleeping. On Monday, May 5th, 2014, everything changed. My boss at that time was approaching retirement. A new man was to take his place from Madrid, and they were expected to work together for 3 months to ensure a smooth transition. No problem, it was my job. On Thursday, May 1st, 2014, my current boss passed away from a heart attack. Late on Friday, May 2nd, I received an email marked urgent. It said that Mr. Saster would be in the office at 9 a.m. on Monday, May 5th, and that I should provide him with any assistance I could. All other matters had to be transferred to competent employees and monitored. I forwarded the email to my team so they knew what was going on. The girls in the office were excited. They saw his photo in a corporate magazine. They said he was handsome. On Monday morning, I arrived at the office early to make sure everything was ready. I spent the weekend scheduling and distributing work around the office, but predicting what Mr. Saster might need was proving more difficult. I tried to provide as many options as possible. There was a light knock on the door. "Come in." A new person appeared on the threshold, a very handsome young man. The girls were wrong. He was not just handsome, he was really handsome. I immediately felt the attraction. Dangerous and almost half my age. Definitely the stuff of my personal fantasy. I even felt like I was a little excited. "Hi, I'm Jason Saster. I hope you are Irene. I was told that I would find you here." He extended his hand. I stood up and shook it, shaking slightly. "Mr. Saster, I received the memo on Friday afternoon. Welcome. Have you already found housing? Did the memorandum say that you came from Madrid?" "Just Jason, please, especially in private," he said with a charming, friendly smile. "The company lent me one of its apartments for a while. Thank you for asking." "Then Jason, would you like a cup of coffee?" "Unfortunately, we don't have fancy cups, Mr. Saster." "Jason would love to have coffee without sugar," he said with a smile. "Jason has a lot of work ahead of him, and he was told that you are the person to spend a lot of time with." He laughed. This made me giggle like a schoolgirl. "Need to pass the time? I should be so lucky." I introduced him to the staff, told him about the plans I had prepared, and we got to work. We worked hard all day. I really liked it. "We've reached a good point to stop." He looked at the wall clock, checked it with the watch on his hand, and announced that that was enough for today and that he was going to the beach. "Do you go to the beach, Irene?" "Sometimes after work, but more often on weekends if the weather is good." I was lucky. My apartment is right across the street from the beach. I found myself on the sand in a couple of minutes. "Maybe I'll see you there someday." "It would be nice." "See you in the morning." 8:30, Irene. I like to start early. Will this suit you?" "Great, Jason. I hope you have a good time at the beach." It was a wonderful day, not at all vulgar, but very pleasant. Jason was handsome, witty, very smart, and fun to be around. I froze in place. Jason was the man of my dreams, or fantasies, my husband's fantasies. My heart began to pound. Something for my husband to build his fantasy of. His wife with an incredibly handsome young man from the office. I'll turn it into my fantasy. Not knowing Jason's size, I'll have to imagine one of the big ones I saw on the beach between his powerful thighs and imagine him having sex with me. "Good evening, dear. How was your day at the office?" Oscar smiled, hugging me. He always did this when he came home early, and it was one of the many things that made my husband great. If it weren't for his complete inability in bed, he would be perfect. "I had the most wonderful day imaginable," I said enthusiastically. I rehearsed this phrase all the way home. The most wonderful day Oscar could imagine was me in bed with a handsome man, completely satisfied. The second is me telling him that I imagine myself in bed with a handsome man, completely satisfied. And yes, I have to admit, this is exactly what I imagined the whole way home. And the man was Jason, my new boss, with whom I would spend many official hours together. Oscar smiled with delight and waited patiently while I collected my thoughts. It was necessary for this to sound as believable as possible because the spouses were often invited to corporate events. I was in the office a little earlier, putting the table in order, preparing for a meeting with the new boss. There was a knock on the glass door. "Come in," I called. The door opened and the most wonderful young man walked into my office and quietly closed the door behind him. He was stunningly handsome. Broad shoulders, thin waist, beautiful blue eyes, blonde hair, and the most charming smile you can imagine. A shiver ran down my spine, and forgive me, Oscar. I paused for effect. "I'm horny Forgive me, dear." As I had hoped, Oscar's eyes lit up. He smiled the most excited smile imaginable. Having hugged me, he spun me around like a child. He put me on the ground, hugged me tightly, and showered me with kisses. Holding me at arm's length, he said, "My wonderful, wonderful wife, how I love you. You look as radiant and happy as I feel. Will you see him again? I expected some delight, but not this kind. Does he expect me to say that I have already made his fantasy come true?" I thought, seeing how Oscar could barely contain his excitement. "Of course, I'll see him, stupid, at 8:30 tomorrow morning. He's my boss." "Wonderful." He laughed and hugged me again. He pressed me so tightly that I almost suffocated. Then, bringing his lips close to my ear, he whispered, "Is he big?" I pushed him away angrily. I was beside myself with rage, but also full of hope. How should I know? We worked in the office all day. You stupid little insignificant person. Even if he doesn't have this, he's still 3 times the size of your pathetic image. I instantly regretted my words and was ready to bite my tongue. "Oh, Oscar, I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have said that." I stopped mid-sentence. My husband was not angry at all. He was delighted, absolutely happy. "I love you, dear, with all my heart." He laughed. "Maybe we can go to the beach and show off your beautiful body." For the first time, I agreed with enthusiasm. "Excited, excited," my husband muttered joyfully. "She's excited," as soon as she saw him. My beautiful wife got horny. "Oscar, if you don't stop repeating about arousal, I won't tell you next time." He blew me a kiss and made a sign as if he was zipping up his lips. I adored this man. Sometimes he was a real fool. "Don't you want to please the world and go to the beach naked, my beauty?" As I already explained, the beach in Barcelona is very long. There are 4 main areas and several areas reserved for nudists or naturists. When he said, "to the beach," there was a sly sparkle in his eyes. Was there special emphasis on the "on" in his words? I thought. Maybe he's going to that same nudist beach. New in town? Did he know that there are several beaches? Apartment 2 minutes from the beach. Unfortunately, there are quite a lot of them. "I don't think so, dear. I just got a new boss," I laughed. "The new boss who made you horny, my dear," he recalled with joy. If I knew for sure that the beach Jason was going to was ours, I would have agreed without hesitation. I would love to strip for Jason, I admitted to myself, but I couldn't risk it. If I take off my panties today, I will be expected to take them off every time. We went to our beach, our usual place. They laid out our beach mat, and I took off my light dress under the enthusiastic gaze of my husband. Although I didn't enjoy much of the sex that might follow, I did enjoy getting naked while my husband watched me. It gave him pleasure, and that's what loving wives do. And I liked it a little, to be honest. He smiled when he saw that I was wearing a different bikini than usual. The top was larger than the last one, but the bottom was noticeably smaller. The cutout was higher in the back, revealing more of my butt. I pirouetted so Oscar could appreciate how revealing it was from behind. Unfastening the top, I threw it on the mat and rubbed my breasts, as all women do when taking off their bra. I stood on the mat, sat down, and made myself comfortable. She put on her sunglasses and placed a small pillow in the right place. I leaned back, put my hands behind my head, and closed my eyes, letting my thoughts wander. But they didn't wander. They went straight back to Jason walking into my office just a few hours ago. Another shiver ran down my spine like lightning, and I became aroused, letting out a quiet sigh of satisfaction. It's good that I swapped my usual blue bikini for a light one with a floral pattern. I probably dozed off, immersed in pleasant memories of the past day. Irene, it really was Jason's voice. My eyes instantly opened. Jason, my new boss, stood at the edge of our beach mat in all his wonderful glory. "Jason, how great it is to see you," I exclaimed joyfully, hastily sitting down, internally cursing myself for not taking off my panties just to be safe. Oscar had already jumped up and was about to get up. "Jason, this is my husband, Oscar." By then, Oscar was standing next to Jason, holding out his hand. I swallowed. In a sitting position, I found myself at the level of their, well, groin. Comparing the two sizes in front of me, all the stories from the girls in the office about their weekend adventures made complete sense. My husband was more excited than I had ever seen him. Oscar was a simple man in every sense of the word. He tried his best, but life and many years of marriage made their own adjustments. His courage, unfortunately, had long since lost all self-confidence. If it were a living creature, it would shyly peek around the corner, afraid of everything in the world, kind of like a cat that did something bad and then hid behind the curtain, hoping that no one would notice it. The situation was aggravated by the fact that at especially solemn moments, this courage disappeared as quickly as it appeared. It left its traces in the most unexpected places. Well, just like a cat who loves to throw fur all over the house. Jason had a different story. This is someone who lived in absolute harmony with the world and, apparently, with himself. Everything about him looked solid and confident. Even when he was just sitting, he radiated the same relaxation that we see in cats, comfortably lounging on pillows, as if they were the rightful masters of this world. A little more, and he would only have to scratch himself behind his ear. It seemed that he had everything in its place like in a good film, where there is not a single extra scene. Even looking at him evoked a strange feeling, either envy or admiration. In a word, he was as convincing as the main characters in action films, calm and confident that the world was at his feet and the rest was details. When I glanced casually at Oscar and then at Jason, I couldn't help but wonder, how did life turn out this way? And what would Oscar say if his cherished fantasy finally became a reality? After all, he always seemed to want to be just an observer in this game, didn't he? Sometimes there are moments in life when it seems that you are starring in a film, but they obviously didn't give you the script. Irene? It was my husband's voice. Do you mind if Jason joins us? I quickly moved to the center of the rug, making room for Jason next to me as Oscar smiled and Jason winked conspiratorially. With a few changes, we all settled down. Jason was leaning on his elbow to my right, and my husband was to my left. I lay on my back, with my arms at my side. I was telling Oscar how well we did today while you were up in the clouds, Jason teased. Sorry, I was thinking about what we did today in case you had questions. I lied easily. Oh, we're not in the office. We don't get paid to think or do things, so we don't do them, okay? You and I both work hard in the office during the day. This is what we get paid for. But we are not paid for working outside the office. I hope you don't mind that I showed up like this. You don't mind at all, do you, Oscar? I answered quickly. And yes, I understand about the office. An office is an office, and personal is personal. It suits me perfectly. Jason lowered his head slightly and winked. Okay, I like girls who can listen to directions. He laughed, and Oscar happily joined in the fun. Jason continued to talk with Oscar, discussing work in a typically masculine way. I felt some tension, but decided to play around a little. She unobtrusively moved her hand so as to lightly touch him, and felt the tension in him intensify. Thoughts flashed through my head, which girls sometimes talk about, sharing some translucent hints. Doing this carefully and discreetly, I moved my hand slightly so as not to arouse suspicion. My thoughts, to be honest, were far from the conversation that the men were having. I tried to remain calm, although my heart was beating faster. Jason moved slightly, but did not show that he noticed my actions, which only fueled the situation. There came a point when it became obvious that it was time to wind down. Taking control of the situation, I carefully tried to arrange everything in order so that nothing would look strange when we got up. Jason, remaining gallant, stood up and extended his hand to help me up. I accepted his help, trying to hide my emotions and remain polite. We got ourselves in order. Jason pulled on his little shorts, and I pulled the dress over my shoulders. The bikini top remained in the bag. My husband got dressed. Thank you for a wonderful evening. See you in the morning, Irene, back in business mode, he reminded me. It was nice to meet you, Oscar. If this is your local beach, I hope to see you often. Good night. With these words, he casually threw the towel over his shoulder and walked along the beach with a courageous gait. I looked at his every movement, at every muscle. He had a great ass. I like Jason. He's a nice guy, friendly, easy to talk to, my husband said casually. Perfect for you, he added at the end. My heart sank. Yes, he would have been absolutely perfect, but I maintained my composure. Perfect for your fantasy, you mean? Oscar grinned cheerfully. Absolutely right. It's the perfect size for you, I can just imagine. Imagine all you want, hubby, but it will remain your fantasy. Will never become reality. Let me remind you that I am a happily married woman, and he is my boss. Is this the same happily married woman who admitted to her husband that she became aroused as soon as he entered her office? He giggled happily. Oh yes, it really was me. Yes, and I'm very sorry, dear, I shouldn't have said that. And that same happy married woman got excited again when she opened her eyes and saw the same handsome young man, he asked cheerfully. I lowered my head, hoping to hide the big smile that appeared on me from these memories. Yes, I muttered quietly. I didn't hear my happy married wife. I slowly raised my head and smiled. I knew that the truth would bring him indescribable delight. Yes, I'm excited, and I noticed that your little dignity was excited. It's good that it's so invisible, even when excited. Jason wouldn't notice. Oscar beamed with joy. This was exactly what he wanted to hear. Oscar beamed with joy. This was exactly what he wanted to hear. Even though I had no intention of making his fantasy come true, I began to enjoy helping him enjoy it. We hugged and kissed on the beach, then he took my arm and we headed home. My husband was happy, and that made me happy. He talked about Jason all the way home, extolling his virtues. I didn't complain. I was thinking about Jason the whole time. Would you obey his orders? He asked unexpectedly. What? I asked, surprised by the sudden question. He talked about keeping work and personal things separate, and you agreed. Then he said that it was good, and that he liked girls who knew how to listen to directions. When he said this, my heart almost jumped out. Would you follow his instructions? Would I follow what Jason told me? Undoubtedly, without the slightest hesitation. Of course I should, dear. He's my boss. I didn't lie. The rest of the way home, Oscar built up his fantasy of Jason giving me instructions and me obeying them. It was in a playful, light form, and I supported him with pleasure. No matter how many times I reminded him that this was just a fantasy, my husband remained delighted. When we got home, I closed the door behind me and clicked the night latch. Then she turned to her husband. Darling, I need to tell you something. I began carefully. His face lit up with anticipation. I, touched Jason, I whispered. He heard me perfectly. It felt like I had just told him that we had won the top prize in the Euromillions lottery. How did this happen? He muttered confusedly. It was when we were lying on the beach mat. I didn't have anywhere to put my hands, so I just put them along my body. When Jason propped himself up on his elbow to talk to you, his somehow ended up on my arm. It turned out, what have you done? Nothing. I just left my hand in place. I didn't want to draw his attention to it and embarrass him. So, he drawled, drawing out the words as his thoughts raced through his head. He felt it. Did he remove it? He asked with growing delight. No, he didn't remove it, so I don't think he felt or realized that it was my hand. Oscar seemed delighted that I was once again comparing his small size unfavorably to Jason's large size. Was there more to my husband's fantasy than I thought? Did he want me to not only have sex outside of marriage, but also make him feel small and insignificant? Do men really want this? So he didn't remove it, and you didn't remove your hand. What happened next? Oscar was filled with excitement. Well, at some point my hand began to go numb, and I moved my fingers. And he didn't react. Oscar was in seventh heaven. I didn't notice that he felt anything. But maybe he was just too busy talking to you. We got ready for bed. Oscar was very happy. I stripped for him and enjoyed the way he looked at me hungrily, even though I knew he could never satisfy me. Do you want me to tell you a story, dear? Yes, please tell me a fantasy about Jason. My husband was fantasizing. Before Jason even lay down next to me on the beach mat, Oscar was already between my legs. I didn't mind. I waited until he fell asleep and completed the fantasy myself. Tuesday, May 6th, 2014. I woke up early, had breakfast, and was fully dressed and ready to go long before the workday started. Oscar asked if I should wear something sexier. I told him it was completely inappropriate, kissed him on the cheek, and went to work. Remember to follow his instructions, he teased me as I walked out to the elevator. I ignored his words, but smiled internally. Yes, my master. I arrived 10 minutes early. Jason was already there. The coffee was ready for me. He didn't say anything about last night. Opening hours. Before we start, there's something I'd like to discuss, if you don't mind. He paused, and I stood there waiting. Dinner. Yesterday's lunch didn't suit me. What do you usually do for lunch? I breathed a sigh of relief. He must have noticed. I usually go to a small diner. I've been going there for many years. I grab a sandwich and coffee, then look for a place to sit, eat, and watch people, I answered happily. Sounds perfect. Do you mind if I join? Say, an hour? It's better at 12:30. There will be a crowd there at 1 o'clock. Jason took the sandwiches, and I took the coffee. We sat on the bench in the middle. There weren't that many people, but we sat close so that there was room for others too. I liked Oscar. I think we could get along well. This is cool. He also said that he liked you. He kept saying how lucky I was to have such a nice new boss. He said that if you saw us on the beach, you would always be a welcome guest. That's very kind of him. What about you? Would you mind if I joined you on the beach again? I laughed. I would be delighted, I answered enthusiastically. He moved closer. Would you stroke me again? He whispered in my ear. I waited until he straightened up again and very firmly told him, yes, I would like that. Perhaps I too will have a chance to repay you someday. I just giggled and felt embarrassed. I'm not very experienced, I admitted. I haven't had much practice, I added mischievously. I noticed that poor Oscar is such a good person. How does he manage to satisfy such a beautiful woman like you? He can't, but in every other way, he's the best husband you could ever ask for. So, he hesitated, but I knew exactly what he wanted to ask. Can I ask a very personal question? How many personal questions could be asked under the circumstances? Do I have a lover? I smiled. No, much to my husband's chagrin, but lately I've had hope. What a direct answer that was. Jason grinned back at me. That's what I thought. Are you talking about the absence of a lover, an upset husband, or hope? I laughed. Altogether. Yesterday on the beach, you lay down in the center of the rug. Wherever I lay, I was always next to you. Oscar didn't make a sound of protest. He even became excited. I positioned myself so that Oscar and I could talk, my naked parts of the body touching yours in several places. He didn't say a word. To be honest, he even seemed to like it. To be honest, I think your husband wants to be cuckolded. Moreover, he wants to be humiliated and belittled. Why has a beauty like you still not agreed to his proposal? It's been less than 36 hours since we first met, and even less time since he met my husband, and Jason has already figured out what turns me on, something that took me years to figure out. He told me about this about 5 years ago, admitted that he has a fantasy where I sleep with another man or men. I told him that it would remain a fantasy, it would not become reality. He shaved before we went to that beach for the first time. I'm afraid I didn't react very nicely to this. She told him that he looked like an insignificant schoolboy who was waiting for puberty to come. Jason laughed. And how did he react to this? Delight or outrage? Complete delight. Huge, happy smile. This completely confused me. I was about to apologize for my cruelty. Can I ask one more personal question? Do you always wear swimsuits to a nude beach, or am I just unlucky? He grinned. He knew how to make me feel like a schoolgirl. I giggled. Don't you have to wait for permission when you start a question with may? I laughed happily. No, I always wear them. This made him laugh, fortunately. Why? It's complicated. Tell me more simply, I'll try to understand. I hesitated. Should I have told the whole truth and explained that my husband wanted me to be naked so that other men could look at me, that he was hoping that I would cheat on him with one of them, or is it better to come up with an excuse? I feel uncomfortable at the thought of many men looking at my nakedness. Other men will see what only my husband should see, I answered unconvincingly. Jason laughed. It really didn't sound convincing. What does Oscar think? Does he want you covered up a little, or would he prefer you to be naked on the beach? Oscar, he would be delighted if I stood on the beach, waited for a crowd to gather around me, stripped off like a pro, and did the cartwheel. He would be in seventh heaven. We finished our lunch and walked slowly back to the office, trying to avoid people we met. So, if it weren't for Oscar's fantasies, would you happily take off your swimming trunks? This made me freeze. Jason was absolutely right, but how did he figure it out? Got it so quickly. How? I hesitated. He took me aside, away from the lunch crowd. With my back to the wall, he turned to face me. When I was studying for my master's degree, I additionally studied psychology in order to better understand how people work and how they function. Oscar's fantasy is not that uncommon. A handsome man, smart, with a sparkling personality, caring, and an absolutely amazing wife. Everything is perfect, except that he, how should I say this? Absolutely sexually incompetent, I suggested. Exactly. Completely untenable in this regard. He creates a fantasy where his beautiful wife takes huge lovers. They satisfy her, she is happy, and will not leave him. His fantasy develops until he himself begins to enjoy the fact that his wife finds pleasure with other men. This is not far from the husband wanting to be considered inferior to her lovers, to be humiliated by both her and her lovers. I knew he was right. This was the only logical explanation. But Oscar knows that I love him with all my heart, and that I would never think about leaving him. In all other respects, it is perfect. Did you tell him that you stroked me? I couldn't deny it, and I knew that everything Jason said was absolutely true. The evidence had been in front of me for a long time, but I tried to ignore it and not face it. Yes, I said, I answered simply. And was he excited or angry? I've never seen him so excited. Can I say something? Certainly. If I knew for sure that I would see you on the beach yesterday, I would have taken off my swimming trunks. If you go to the beach this afternoon, I'll take them off for you. This will delight my husband and give me pleasure. I would love to see you completely naked next to me on the rug, and I will, but not this afternoon. How long has Oscar had these fantasies? At least 5 years, probably since we got married, maybe even earlier. We were on holiday in North Africa before our wedding. Oscar left to get something. I started talking to 2 nice local guys. They flirted with me, and I liked it, but I didn't think about leaving with them. Oscar stayed longer than I expected. I looked back and saw him, partially hidden behind a large column. Maybe that's when it all started. We continued to the office as we were already late. Oscar has had this fantasy for a long time. I think we should make him wait and suffer as long as possible. Oh, sorry, you want to fulfill your husband's fantasy, right? You shouldn't make such assumptions, sorry. I could hug him. With you, I would be delighted, and we can make him suffer as much as you want. You are my boss, I follow your orders. Oscar reminded me of this when I left the apartment this morning. We walked up to the office steps. Listen to me, follow me. Tell Oscar everything you think he would be pleased to hear, he said, opening the door of the building. Tuesday. Day. Oscar was as excited as a child on his birthday. Well, how did it go? He asked impatiently as soon as I crossed the threshold. A very busy day. We didn't talk about anything other than work until lunchtime. He invited me to lunch at the same sandwich bar where we met. I didn't say anything. He said that he was glad to meet you, that he liked you, and expressed the hope that you could become friends. I said that you thought the same, and that we would be glad if he joined us when we were at the beach. Then we returned to the office and continued to work. Oh yes, I mentioned that we might be at the beach again, this afternoon at our usual spot, and that he could always join us. This is all? Nothing about you petting him? No, he didn't mention that. Maybe he was too embarrassed, just like me. Jason was already on the beach when we arrived. He spread out the beach mat and moved to one end. He looked great. We chatted calmly while Oscar took off his shorts and t-shirt and sat down on the other edge of the rug. It was like having an audience. With Jason as half the audience, my entire body filled with excitement. Unzipping my dress, I stood so Jason could get the best view of me and let the dress fall to my feet. Usually, I pulled it over my head. He smiled. I tore my gaze away from Jason and looked at my husband. He smiled excitedly. With my hands on my bikini bottom, I watched Jason's reaction carefully. He shook his head almost imperceptibly. It's a pity. I adjusted my swim trunks to hide the first movement, getting comfortable, and ran my finger under the elastic, pretending to check that everything was in place. Everything was in place. It's a pity. On the way to the beach, Oscar mentioned that if I had the opportunity to touch Jason again, he wouldn't mind. I stopped him right on the street and asked if he would really be delighted. It was nice to tease him and please him, but Jason was right, there was no need to rush into making his fantasy come true. Sitting between two attractive men, I pressed my hands to my body. Both Oscar and Jason leaned to the sides a little, giving me space. Jason leaned on his elbow. Turning to Oscar, I waited until he looked at me. For the next 10 minutes, I played with Jason, completely openly from my husband, while they both happily chatted about what men usually talk about when the wife of one caresses the other. Do you mind, Irene? Sorry, what? We talked about you, about your beautiful body, and why you left your swimming trunks on. I have an idea that might convince you to let Oscar and I enjoy your full beauty. Are you ready to try? Yes, boss. Of course, boss. I'll try, if necessary. He extended his hand to me, I offered him my left, and he lifted me to my feet. Without asking Oscar's permission or even inviting him with us, Jason pulled me towards the sea. You didn't have to drag me, you know. Definitely, it was the only way to hold your hand. Now, what are we going to do? I ran into the water, laughing and squealing like a teenager, raising my legs high, trying to run through the waves. Having caught on one of the waves, I fell straight into the next, larger one. This was not my plan. In an instant, Jason was there. I felt his strong arms wrap around me. One large palm rested on my painful chest, the other on my groin. He easily lifted me above the water. I knew that I was facing the beach and that my husband could see our every step, although the water in my eyes prevented me from seeing anything. Everything is fine. He turned me around and slowly lowered me down his body until my feet touched the sandy bottom. Holding my hips, he gently brushed my hair away from my face and smiled widely. Well, it turned out better than expected. My hand was already wrapped around his legs again before I realized that the water was barely knee-deep. I carefully looked over his shoulder and saw that Oscar was watching us carefully. Should I take off your swimming trunks now, or should we go a little further? Let's go a little further, then he won't see you taking them off. Let his imagination run wild. Once we were in the water, Jason suddenly knelt down in front of me, clearly deciding to play a little game. With a serious look, as if he was preparing for an important mission, he teased me, gently touching the water around me with his fingers. Before I realized what was happening, he deftly grabbed my swimming trunks and, like a victorious hunter, swept them off me in one movement, lifting them above his head as if they were the main trophy of the day. Before I knew it, I was already sitting in front of him, absolutely carefree and, yes, without swimming trunks. Of course, Oscar, our attentive observer, didn't miss it. It's hard not to notice that your wife suddenly found herself without her bathing suit. The game continued. We swam, dived, fought the waves and each other. Jason would lift me onto his back as if I were as light as a feather, and I would cling to his shoulders, laughing, like some pirate determined to conquer a new ship. In moments of particularly energetic play, I even sat on his shoulders, wrapping my legs around his waist so as not to fall, and dived back into the sea with a cheerful squeal. Laughing, we struggled and splashed, our hands sliding through the water and sometimes over each other, but only because it is much more difficult to stay underwater. But then Jason decided to go further, clearly inspired by his success with the swimming trunks, and proposed a new trick. Let's try to walk up on me, throw your legs over your shoulders. This is too much, I giggled, but still decided to try, like a person who cannot refuse a good challenge. I began to walk along his body, and he, naturally, did everything possible to prevent me from falling. As soon as my legs were on his shoulders, it became clear to me that balance is a relative thing. I barely had time to enjoy this height before Jason and I, losing our tempers in an instant, fell into the water, splashing and choking with laughter. "Do you think no one noticed anything?" he asked, barely catching his breath, with a sly smile on his face. Of course, it was time to get back to Oscar, but not before Jason decided that I wouldn't go near him without my swim trunks. He sat me on his shoulders and, as if this was his main task for the day, began to return my bathing suit. He put one leg through, then the other, and only when the swimming trunks reached the knees, it became clear that this would not end there. Both of us, laughing, tried to pull on the wet fabric, but we only succeeded in splashing around and having fun once again. And when the swimming trunks finally took their place, we both, satisfied with ourselves, went back to Oscar, as if nothing suspicious had happened. My husband handed me a towel, but Jason took it and began to dry me thoroughly. Oscar didn't say a word of protest. "Looks like you had fun," he noted happily. "I haven't had this much fun in the water for so long," I admitted. "Jason is so strong, he just threw me back and forth." Oscar didn't stop talking the whole way to the apartment. He was so excited that he kept repeating the same thing over and over again. I closed the apartment door and latched it. "Jason kissed me," I said calmly. The look on my husband's face was priceless. "Where?" "On the lips. He kissed my cheeks. One on the face and one on the butt," I giggled. Time to sleep. We went to bed. "Shall I tell you a story?" "Yes, please, about me and Jason." I finished the story myself as soon as I heard his quiet snoring. Thursday, May 8th, 2014. When we arrived at the beach, Jason was already waiting. We didn't discuss anything, but the routine had already been established. Jason was on the left, Oscar was on the right, and I sat in the middle. I stopped a little away from Jason's feet and waited for Oscar to do what I asked him to do on the way to the beach. Nothing complicated. Take off your top and shorts, say hello to Jason, and settle down on the mat. Oscar loved watching me undress, and I wanted him to be able to see it. When everything was ready, I, at Jason's sign, unzipped my short dress. With my hands down, I rolled my shoulders slightly and looked at Oscar's face. I wish I could videotape his reaction. It would be so satisfying. I wasn't completely naked, but to be honest, I might as well have been. I was only wearing 2 pieces of clothing, a swimsuit top and bottom that Jason had bought for me during lunch. It was easy to describe. 2 tiny triangles of bright yellow fabric suspended on a dark blue cord. My buttocks were completely exposed except for the string that ran between them. It took a long time to get everything just right, but it was worth it just to see the look on Oscar's face. I slowly turned around so that both Oscar and Jason could see my bare buttocks, as agreed, and leaned forward slightly. Sitting between the 2 men, I placed my hand and waited impatiently for Jason to make his move. I completely ignored my husband. He had already received his dose of pleasure for the day. My task was to play with Jason. I had no idea how to do this. During lunch, Jason insisted that we take an extra half hour since we were working hard. He took me to a specialty store that sold very sexy underwear and very revealing swimsuits. I would never have dared to go there alone, but Jason confidently led me inside. He went straight to the swimsuit section and picked out the tiniest ones I'd ever seen. They were miniature. "I would like to see this beautiful lady in these swimsuits," he said to the saleswoman. The young girl behind the counter looked at me, then at these tiny models, and smiled. She pointed us to a fitting room at the back of the store. "Enjoy," she said softly as Jason led me there. I loved getting naked in front of Jason. He was very active in helping with shoelace fittings. The first one was described above. Very cute, comfortable, and extremely sexy. The second was even more frank. Jason really liked it. "We'll take both," he announced. But, I started. I will solve this problem, and you will be perfect. It gave me goosebumps all over my body. Jason removed the labels from the first swimsuit and helped me put it back on. I wore it for the rest of the day. Jason didn't hesitate to put my underwear in the bag along with the second swimsuit. Already on the way out, the girl at the checkout quietly whispered, "You're lucky. He's simply amazing." I couldn't agree more. I was very aware that Jason had seen my entire body without clothes, and that I was wearing very little under my work clothes. I felt excited and mischievous, and Jason only made it worse by just looking at me and smiling. Jason and I sat on the beach, enjoying the sound of the waves and the warm sand under our feet. The evening was surprisingly calm, and it was exactly what I needed. Sometimes it seems that after long and busy days, the only thing you want is to just sit somewhere in nature and let your thoughts flow smoothly, like the waves in front of us. We discussed all sorts of nonsense, like old friends, sometimes about work, sometimes about plans for the weekend. At such moments, it was easy to forget about everything that was happening around and just enjoy a conversation with someone who knew how to listen. Jason was always attentive to detail, and it was captivating. He could pick up any topic, even if it seemed too banal or personal to me. After some time, my husband Oscar joined us. I saw him walking along the beach towards us, and I immediately realized that he was a little tense. However, as always, Oscar was never very sociable, especially when there were people around whom he did not know very well. But despite this, he was a man with a kind heart, and more importantly, he always tried. Even though his methods sometimes left much to be desired, I appreciated it. When he approached, Jason, as always, treated him with respect and attention. There was never the slightest hint of any coldness or disdain. On the contrary, he always tried to include Oscar in the conversation. Perhaps this is why I enjoyed being around Jason so much. He knew how to create a comfortable atmosphere for everyone. "How are you?" Jason asked, rising slightly from the towel as Oscar approached. "It's okay," Oscar replied, sitting down next to me, but his tension was still palpable. I felt a little sad. I knew how difficult it was sometimes for him to adapt to such situations. We continued talking, and somehow the conversation itself turned to the topic of personal relationships. To be honest, I was surprised at how easily Jason could touch on such topics without any discomfort. This puzzled me a little and, at the same time, delighted me. Jason talked about how important it is to maintain emotional contact in a marriage and how sincerity and openness can work wonders. His advice sounded simple, but at the same time profound. I felt that every phrase he said touched my heartstrings. I listened to him with gratitude. After every word he said, something new seemed to awaken in me, something that had previously been hidden behind the daily routine. I looked at Oscar, and I suddenly wanted him to hear the same thing. Perhaps we should have talked more about our feelings, shared more with each other what was going on inside. I looked at my husband with a slight smile, hoping that he felt the same way as me. "You're right," Oscar said unexpectedly. He, too, listened to Jason carefully, and although he seemed a little embarrassed at the beginning of the conversation, now his face looked more relaxed. "Sometimes it seems like I keep too much to myself. Perhaps we should talk about this more often." I couldn't believe he said that. Oscar was not a man who spoke easily about feelings, and this was something new for me. I felt gratitude both to him and to Jason, who, without realizing it, seemed to have helped us take a step towards something important. Jason smiled his signature soft smile that didn't have an ounce of smugness in it. He looked like he was just glad that he could help in some way, that his words mattered. When it began to get dark, we decided to walk along the beach. The evening was so beautiful that we didn't want to leave. I felt a light breeze caressing my face, and at that moment everything seemed so light and simple. We were walking along the sand, talking about various little things, when I suddenly realized that my outfit was attracting the glances of passers-by. The little blue dress emphasized my curves, and I felt the men stealing glances in my direction from time to time. I turned to Jason and admitted with slight embarrassment, "You know, until recently, I didn't think at all about how people looked at me." He laughed the way only he could, sincerely and with slight surprise. Is it true? Haven't you noticed this? Absolutely, I answered honestly. Somehow I didn't care about this. But lately I have begun to realize that there are things that I simply had not thought about before. Jason looked at me carefully, and in his gaze I caught something more than just interest. He knew exactly what I meant, although there was no need to voice it. These few days with him changed a lot in my perception of myself. He showed me something new, not only in terms of relationships, but also in the importance of understanding and accepting yourself. Well, Jason smiled, perhaps this is the beginning of something interesting. I couldn't help but agree with him. There were so many emotions swirling inside me that I couldn't explain in words. All I could do was enjoy this moment and where it might take me. You see, he said seriously, your husband Oscar has a fantasy, and you, Irene, as a loving and devoted wife, must make sure that your beloved husband is happy and satisfied. Do you agree? I nodded vigorously, barely holding back a laugh in his serious tone. He continued, consider myself your friend. I'm your friend, aren't I, Irene? I nodded again, trying to suppress my laughter. I feel like I have an obligation to help you in every way possible. We must do everything possible to ensure that your husband gets the maximum pleasure from his fantasy, don't you agree? Even to such an extent as to make his fantasy come true. What do you think? Taking a deep breath, I suppressed a laugh and, with the same seriousness, confirmed that I completely agreed. Anything possible. Don't miss anything. We don't have any clothes on. And then we both burst out laughing. I wish you would tell Oscar the truth when he asks what we did together, he said. How much truth to tell is up to you, he laughed. Can you handle it? Of course, Jason, I always tell my husband the truth. I am his devoted wife in everything I do and say. The return from the beach that evening turned out to be full of questions. Oscar was so excited that even on the way home, he could not calm down and constantly bombarded me with questions. What was it like to be next to Jason? Did I like the attention I received? What did I think about all this? Question after question, and not a moment of silence. I barely had time to follow the flow of his thoughts. We walked down the street, and frankly, it was not the most convenient place to discuss all this. We could be overheard at every step. I decided that I would leave the answers until I returned home, where I could discuss everything calmly. Finally, we got to the apartment. I closed the door, clicked the lock, and turned to Oscar. It was time to answer all his questions, at least the ones I could remember. And so it began. I told him that I was pleasantly surprised by how Jason is a true force of nature, albeit hidden under the appearance of a charming guy. There was something magnetic about his company, and I couldn't help but admire his confidence and charm. Oscar loved hearing how impressed I was, and I felt like he was happy for me. He glowed with happiness, as if everything that was happening added to him some mysterious pride. He asked where I got the swimsuit from, and I explained that Jason had brought me to the store and helped me pick it out. The saleswoman also participated in the process, as if all three of us were doing something important, as if it were a mini mission to find the perfect outfit for the beach. I went to the fitting room, tried on the swimsuit, and Jason even helped make sure everything fit perfectly. Oscar seemed to enjoy imagining this picture, his wife in the spotlight and another person helping her with her choice. He was so happy and seemed inspired by the whole story. Everything I told him was true, but of course, I still kept something quiet. Some details are ones that could evoke completely different emotions. But as they say, everything in moderation. I knew that it was important for Oscar to see me happy and confident, and all this talk about how good it was on the beach created in him a feeling of satisfaction that he seemed to have been looking for a long time. We exchanged a few more phrases as I described how great it was to spend time enjoying the company of new acquaintances and the surrounding summer. Then Oscar, almost anticipating, asked if I wanted to tell him a story. I smiled. No matter how hard I tried, my poor, weak husband couldn't last even a couple of minutes. Poor lamb. Friday, May 9th, 2014. No panties day. Oscar left for work before me, as he usually did on Fridays, and I was already in the office, ready to serve Jason coffee when he arrived. We worked non-stop until lunchtime. Jason had a lot of ideas he wanted to discuss. He also wanted to reassure me. "Your little problem," he laughed. "You haven't discussed it with anyone?" I spoke with my mother 6 months after our wedding. She was horrified that I would even think about my pleasure. My role as a wife is to serve my husband, to satisfy his desires, without thinking about my own. It didn't help. "Have you noticed how I hold my pencil when I work?" No. Should I have? This can sometimes be a useful guide. I'm left-handed. Lefties often think differently, outside the box, as they like to say now. I see before me a beautiful woman who has never experienced sexual satisfaction in her marriage. Her husband encourages her to look for satisfaction elsewhere, but she is torn between desire and marriage vows, and her mother told her that her own pleasure did not matter. She should strive only to satisfy her husband. How do you like this description? Exactly. That perfectly describes my problem since Oscar first told me about his fantasy. I laughed cheerfully. When I have a lover, it will be only to please my husband, as my mother ordered. And I will remain true to my vows because I will obey my husband. 2 out of 3 tasks completed. Not so bad, right? Do you know anyone who might be available? I finished with a mischievous laugh. It was incredibly nice to talk to someone who completely understood my situation and completely agreed with me. Jason said he'd think about it, and we spent the rest of the lunch break discussing my actions over the past weekend and his reactions. I agreed with every word he said. He is my boss, and I knew how to follow instructions. Friday afternoon. When we arrived, he was already on the beach, lying on his elbows, his legs slightly spread. He looked great. "This is what you wanted me to see all these years, isn't it, dear? Much more impressive than your tiny thing." Poor Oscar almost choked. This was the first time I directly pointed out how gorgeous Jason was and how his size exceeded the Oscars. He was delighted, like a kid who gets a giant railroad for Christmas. I waited until Oscar greeted Jason, then undressed and lay down on my side of the beach mat. Standing at Jason's feet, I unzipped the dress and carefully pulled the dress off my shoulders. Jason smiled. Oscar's attention was focused on me. I exposed my breasts, lowered my dress to my waist, and stopped again. Oscar clearly sensed that something special was happening. He watched my every move, despite the fact that my body was facing Jason. I lowered the dress even lower, to the place where the beginning of the panties should be. Just a little more. Oscar's eyes were wide open, as was his mouth. I dropped my dress on the sand. Oscar sighed with delight. After so many years, his wife was finally completely naked on the beach. I let him enjoy it and enjoyed his delight. Jason let him enjoy the moment too. "Isn't our girl beautiful, Oscar?" Oscar was still speechless. He apparently realized the word "our." He swallowed. "Yes, she's great. The best woman on the beach. We're very lucky. How are you, princess? Do you like standing naked in front of your husband and me?" "Princess? He didn't say that before." "Yes, my prince. I'm completely happy," I nodded vigorously. "Are you horny, princess?" "Very, my prince." "Is it true?" "I'm afraid I can't see." "Oscar, can you tell?" "It's hard to say for sure." "Exactly so, I think too. I believe that one of the greatest joys for a man is the opportunity to see his woman happy and content. Do you agree?" "I completely agree. A man should easily see that his woman is happy and content." "Princess, show me how you feel," Jason said with a slight smile, playing with words as if making fun of me, but there was something more in his voice, a hint of depth. The wind from the sea touched my skin, cooling me. I stood on the sand, feeling extraordinary freedom, but also some awkwardness from the whole situation. My heart was beating faster than usual as my husband, Oscar, and Jason, that confident and charismatic man, were deep in conversation. They seemed to understand each other perfectly. Their communication seemed natural, even casual, but there was something more hidden in it. I glanced at both of them. They were smiling, exchanging friendly glances and phrases. I felt a little awkward, but at the same time something in this situation attracted me, gave me a feeling of some mysterious pleasure that was difficult for me to describe. Their casual conversations were accompanied by occasional glances in my direction, as if they shared some silent secret among themselves. I felt the curious glances of several random passers-by, but I tried not to attach any importance to it, confidently responding to the smiles of the men. Jason winked at me, full of self-confidence as always, and Oscar, my dear husband, looked a little embarrassed, but still there was a hint of joy in him. He was calm, even a little relaxed, although the situation was certainly not familiar to him. Their communication continued easily, as if they had long been accustomed to being in each other's company, and there was no tension or understatement between them. However, for me it all looked completely different. I felt how gradually, step by step, something new and unusual was growing between us. It felt like time slowed down a bit, allowing me to immerse myself deeper into the moment. At some point, Oscar looked thoughtfully at Jason, as if trying to understand what he wanted to offer. "Do you mind if I ask you to help her get ready for our breakfast tomorrow?" Jason said with a soft but confident smile. His words sounded unexpected, but did not cause the slightest tension. It was as if it were a matter of course, as if they had already discussed everything a long time ago and made a decision. My husband, without hesitation, readily agreed. He didn't seem to notice at all that events were unfolding somewhat differently than he might have expected. Nevertheless, the atmosphere remained light and relaxed. I felt some kind of invisible tension arise between the three of us, but it did not seem unpleasant. On the contrary, it only intensified the feeling of something unusual and exciting. I couldn't help but succumb to this new sensation that was overwhelming me. Jason and I went for a walk along the shore, enjoying the warm evening. The sun had already dropped below the horizon, painting the sky in golden pink hues, creating ideal conditions for a leisurely stroll. I felt the sand under my feet and heard the soft sound of waves rolling onto the shore. We walked side by side, and although we were silent, I felt a special connection being established between us. We just enjoyed the moment, taking our time and not thinking about tomorrow. It was a time of silence and inner peace, when you are completely open to what is happening around you and enjoying every moment. Oscar remained on our rug, and I periodically turned around to look at him. He sat lost in thought, but from time to time he raised his head to glance at us. I noticed how his face expressed something more than just observational interest. He was thoughtful, absorbed in some kind of internal reflection, and it seemed to me that for him this time also became a moment of change. Jason and I returned back and decided to take a dip in the sea. The water was cool but refreshing. We laughed and splashed like children, forgetting about time and all worries. I felt incredible lightness and joy in these simple, almost childish games. We bathed in the warmth of the setting sun and in the sea waves, which seemed to wash us away from everything unnecessary. For a moment I felt carefree, completely relaxed, as if the whole world had stopped, and we were surrounded only by the sea and boundless freedom. When we returned to shore, Oscar, still lost in thought, handed Jason a towel. He carefully handed it to me, gently touching my hand, and carefully dried me, trying to make me feel comfortable. His gestures were calm and confident, as if he had done this many times before, although I knew that this was a new experience for him. Everything happened so easily and naturally that I couldn't help but smile. Oscar watched us carefully. It seemed that he was still thinking about something of his own. His gaze was concentrated on his thoughts, but still he did not miss a single moment of what was happening. Afterwards, the three of us sat quietly on the beach, discussing our upcoming plans for the weekend. Jason, who was in Barcelona for the first time, expressed a desire to explore the city. His voice sounded with interest and impatience. He wanted to know more about the place where he found himself. "I have never been to Barcelona before, but I have long dreamed of visiting. I would like to see all the most interesting places. Any ideas on where to start on Saturday?" he asked, addressing both me and Oscar. My husband, happily taking part in the conversation, suggested, "Irene was born and raised in this city. She knows every street of it. I'm sure she'll be a great guide, and you'll get to know a new side of her outside of work." I felt a warm wave of gratitude to Oscar for his willingness to support me in this moment and allow me to share with Jason what I love about my hometown. We had a full day ahead of us in Barcelona, and I happily began to plan what I would show Jason, how I would guide him through the labyrinthine narrow streets, the majestic cathedrals and secret corners that only the locals knew. Oscar was incredibly excited again on the way home. I felt very pleased inside. I pleased my husband and hoped that he would allow Jason and I to go all the way and become lovers. I closed the apartment door and turned the night lock. When I turned around, Oscar was standing in front of me. "Did Jason have sex with you today?" he asked impatiently. "No, dear, I didn't. We weren't alone for more than a few minutes all day. When Jason takes me, you'll be the first to know, after me, of course. I promise. If possible, I will tell you before Jason has sex with me, so keep your phone with you at all times. If I can't talk, I'll send a message, okay? Do you promise?" "Absolutely." I undressed for him and waited while he prepared his shaving equipment. He was very excited and pleased that Jason had assigned him to prepare me. I was a little worried that he might be so excited that he would accidentally cut my sensitive areas. But my fears were in vain. It was an incredible feeling, his beautiful hands touching me so intimately. When he finished shaving, he gently patted me dry with a soft towel, then gently rubbed the soothing cream all over. I shuddered with pleasure. "Are you thinking about how Jason will caress you tomorrow?" he asked with a satisfied smile. I was about to correct him, but I remembered that he would probably be happier hearing a little lie. "Yes, honey, I can't wait to feel Jason's touch there. He will be delighted with your work." Everything was perfect. Pulling Oscar towards me, I stood on my tiptoes and kissed him tenderly on the lips. "Thank you, honey. This is amazing. Jason will really like it, I'm sure." My wonderful husband simply glowed with happiness. I remained naked while we got ready for bed. I felt like Oscar didn't take his eyes off me the whole time. It was nice, but he lacked the potential for anything more. I satisfied myself with thoughts of Jason. "Do you want to listen to a fairy tale?" "Yes, please, darling, tell me." Saturday, May 10th, 2014. The morning sky was cloudy, but my mood was bright and joyful. I was wearing a skirt, shorter than my usual work skirts. I didn't wear panties, which delighted Oscar, and I didn't wear a bra, which showed off my breasts. This made my husband very happy. We met at a sandwich bar for lunch and kissed. I took him to a crowded coffee shop where we could just get lost in the crowd before exploring La Rambla, the city's busiest street. I told him how in the Middle Ages there was an open sewer channel surrounded by walls that formed the border of the Gothic quarter, where the Romans settled 2,000 years ago. After walking through the market rows, we wandered into the streets to the Church of Santa Maria del Pi, so he could admire the world's largest pink-stained glass window, and then headed towards the cathedral before returning to La Rambla, where we bought our sandwiches and coffees and found a spot on a low wall in Plaza Catalunya to relax and people watch. Jason asked if I knew a local sex shop. He wanted to buy me another gift. My search several years ago paid off. We went to Cara de la Canuda, which I had passed by more than once without having the courage to enter. But holding Jason's hand, I no longer had any doubts. Once again, he knew exactly what he needed. Saturday Beach. Oscar was waiting for us, full of questions. The first and most important thing is whether Jason liked his creation. Jason praised him. Jason offered to put sunscreen on me. It was amazing. It was the first time Jason had touched me so openly and intimately. As my husband watched, he carefully made sure not to miss a single centimeter, either in front or behind. All this time he had a lively conversation with my husband about how my body felt. When he finished, I was exhausted and extremely happy. It was my turn to apply sunscreen to my new man. I was just as thorough. Jason rolled over and I started again. His shoulders took a long time, but they were broad. His waist was narrow and his beautiful butt demanded endless attention. We stayed on the beach until late evening. Jason and I played in the sea, walked along the shore holding hands, and openly embraced on the beach mat. Returning to the apartment, I closed the door and turned the night lock. Did he have sex with you? Oscar asked, even before I turned to him. Oscar, dear, as I told you last night and repeated this morning. When Jason does this, I'll tell you about it right away, okay? It was already quite late when we started getting ready for bed. Do you want me to tell you a story? My husband suggested with a plea in his voice. Not today, dear. Jason gave me a task, and he would love it if you could take a look and make sure I'm doing everything right. I didn't have any instructions. There was no script, just a suggestion that Oscar might want to watch. Oscar looked depressed. His eyes were a little dull, as if something was bothering him, but I decided not to focus on it at that moment. We were ready to go to the bedroom, where we planned to spend the evening together, as usual. When we entered the room, I glanced at the familiar surroundings, trying to mentally tune in to calm. Taking a chair, I carefully placed it in front of the dressing table. I wanted everything to be as convenient as possible, so as not to be distracted from the process and to feel comfortable. I slowly began to take out the necessary things from my bag, immersed in preparation. Oscar, who had been standing nearby all this time, smiled faintly, but I noticed that his thoughts were clearly somewhere far away. Realizing that I would need help, I turned to him and softly asked, "Can you help me with this?" My voice was calm and friendly. I handed him the bottle with a simple request. Oscar looked at it, hesitating a little, but after a moment he confidently took it in his hands. He quickly completed the task, and I couldn't help but smile slightly. "You did a great job, thank you." I praised him with sincere gratitude. I wanted him to feel more confident and to know that his help was important to me. We continued our preparations. I carefully ensured that everything was neat and according to plan. Every step was thought out and verified. We tried to do everything carefully, slowly, in order to create the necessary atmosphere of calm and trust. I turned to Oscar again, seeing his doubt. "Can you help me with this?" I asked, holding my gaze on him for a moment. He looked at me, a little thoughtfully, but then nodded, although I noticed that there was a slight worry in his eyes. Oscar was always a person who tried to do everything correctly and according to the rules, and sometimes this caused him anxiety. But I knew that he sincerely wanted everything to go as best as possible. He watched my every move to make sure everything was going as it should. I saw that he was worried, but at the same time he was trying to do everything as best as possible in order to avoid mistakes. We worked harmoniously, interacting so that everyone felt comfortable in this situation. I tried to take my time to avoid any unpleasant sensations, gradually tuning into the process. After a while, I felt a little tense and decided to make sure everything was under control. "Are you sure everything is okay?" I asked carefully watching his reaction. Oscar looked worried, his gaze darting around the room and then back to me, but I hastened to reassure him. "Everything is fine, don't worry," I added with a slight smile, trying to restore his confidence. I wanted him to feel confident around me and know that we could get through this together. He, in turn, relaxed a little, realizing that the situation was under control. We continued to follow the rhythm that we set at the beginning with understanding, attention to each other, and with caution, so that everything would be as comfortable as possible for both of us. When it finally came to an end, I felt satisfied that everything had gone so calmly and harmoniously. We were both able to relax and continue our evening with a feeling of mutual trust and intimacy. "Can I kiss you?" "Yes, dear." He kissed me hungrily. "I love you with all my heart. Thank you, darling, for everything you do for me." "I will never stop loving you," he whispered softly in my ear. Sunday, May 11th, 2014. Morning. I went to Pilates and made an excuse not to come to class on Wednesday afternoon, explaining that I had a new boss and I would be busy until he got the hang of it. Sunday afternoon. Jason was waiting for me. He applied sunscreen to every inch of my body and even twice in some places. I did the same for him. I coated Oscar's back. We sunbathed a little together, talking about various topics. Jason asked how I was doing with the sex toy, and Oscar happily relayed my progress to him, telling him that he had to help in the early stages. Jason looked at him for a few moments before saying that he was very pleased with him and hoped that Oscar would be as considerate and helpful in the future. I thought it sounded like Jason patted Oscar on the head and said, "Well done," but Oscar actually looked very pleased. I'm sure if he were a dog, he would happily wag his tail. For some time, we continued to sunbathe in almost silence. Jason, who suddenly decided that public displays of affection are not just the norm, but almost an official ceremony. He kissed me like the hero of a cheap melodrama, and then began to touch me so innocently that those around me probably thought that he was just an expert at checking clothes for invisible stains. And of course, I, being an absolutely polite person, could not help but support his enthusiasm by slightly moving my legs, to give him more space for this great mission of his. Although, to be honest, I myself don't quite understand how this all began to unfold right in the middle of a walk on the beach, but let's not focus on such trifles. "Well done, Oscar," Jason said. "Great job, you really made it incredible." And so, we continued our walk along the sea, hand in hand, as if all this was normal. But then suddenly a serious topic loomed on the horizon. For some reason, Jason decided that he definitely needed to discuss his participation in my, let's say, training of his youth. "Strange," he said. "Why on earth did he decide that he should help you? He didn't do anything serious, right?" Well, I thought for a second, let's just say that once in my teens I became interested in horse riding. Perhaps then something happened. But I told him that his options are quite limited, and it was true. He thought I was still innocent. I giggled cheerfully, remembering that incident as if it was just another joke. "What about pilates?" Jason asked, completely out of place. "Is this also part of your training?" "Oh yes," I grinned. "With the help of these exercises you can show this. Although, these are all just words." Finally, I told him that if he ever wanted to discuss anything, he would have to ask you for permission. There is no other way. And so, amid the waves and sunset, we continued our endless, slightly strange, but still funny walk along the beach, where even the seagulls seemed to breathe a sigh of relief when this conversation finally came to an end. Sunday night. Oscar was very excited all the way home. He knew he gave me away to Jason. He also knew that Jason knew. If he had any doubts, the sweet kisses and caresses that Jason and I shared before parting should have dispelled them. He said nothing to me about his exposure and did not say a word of complaint about my subsequent behavior. "Are you going to do your homework?" "Certainly." "Can I watch?" "I was under the impression that Jason told you that. Watch until he says otherwise." "Yes, sorry," a quiet, helpful voice. Having made myself comfortable on the bed, I closed my eyes for a moment to feel the comfort of the soft headboard against which I leaned my back. My legs were slightly bent, my body was relaxed, I was ready to plunge into our ritual game with Oscar. With a slight movement of my hand, I handed the toy to Oscar. Oscar silently took the toy from my hands, and I noticed how his movements became slow and thoughtful. He went about his task intently, as if lost in thought, perhaps wondering where this evening would take us. His glances at me in these moments were full of a mixture of respect and uncertainty, as if he was still trying to understand his role in this complex game we had begun. For us, this game was more than just a physical act. It was an opportunity to explore each other, to give free rein to fantasies that are not usually expressed in everyday life. Each of us had a role, and this time mine was the role of the one who completely surrendered to an imaginary partner, whom I called Jason. About 30 minutes passed. This whole process was almost meditative, and I gradually immersed myself in my fantasies, increasingly imagining that it was not Oscar who was next to me, but Jason. In these thoughts, I saw him next to me, tall, strong, with a confident look. In my imagination, his hands confidently touched me, and his presence filled the entire space. With every moment, my fantasies became more and more vivid. I imagined how his body pressed tightly against me, and how his every gesture evoked strong sensations in me. In my thoughts, I screamed his name, unable to contain myself in delight. It was like a little theater in my head, where I played the lead role and Jason was my perfect partner. Oscar quietly watched all this from his seat. He sat on a small wooden chair at the edge of the room, his gaze fixed on me, although I could not understand exactly how he felt. He was part of this game, but his participation at that moment was reduced to the simple role of an observer. I knew that he was just supposed to keep an eye on what was happening, as we had agreed, and although his presence was important, at that moment I felt that I was mentally far away from him. After I completed my fantasy scene, I just lay on my back for a few minutes, feeling my body gradually relax from the emotional intensity. I was completely satisfied, but also exhausted at the same time. It was that moment when feelings and emotions overwhelmed me so much that I just needed to lie down and enjoy the silence that came. Oscar looked at me, his eyes full of bewilderment, as if he couldn't believe that this was all part of our shared scenario. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, then asked quietly, "You're really getting into it, aren't you?" There was genuine surprise in his voice. I could understand that he was a little confused, perhaps even a little jealous of the intensity with which I was experiencing my fantasies. I looked at him, smiled, and answered softly, "Oscar, you know it's just a game. We both take part in it, and it's something we both enjoy." My smile was soft but confident. I didn't want him to feel out of place or unwanted. On the contrary, I wanted him to understand that our game is more than just physical sensations. It was a way for us to explore each other and our desires in a safe environment. He nodded slightly, although I could see that there were still notes of uncertainty in his gaze. Oscar looked away, as if trying to cope with his own thoughts. "Yes," he muttered, lowering his head. "Sorry, I probably just forgot my role." "Don't worry," I said even softer, almost in a whisper. "Everything is going as we ourselves decided. You are part of this, and that is important to me." For a moment there was silence between us, but there was no awkwardness in this silence. It was filled with understanding and acceptance of each other for who we are. Jason and I worked, ate lunch together, and spent time at the beach together. I went to Palette's on Wednesday afternoon and went to the beach right after. Oscar was present every day, but if he hadn't been there, we wouldn't have noticed. Jason owned me, and Oscar knew it. On Saturday, I took Jason sightseeing again, and Oscar joined us on the beach in the afternoon. Jason gave me a bigger toy. That night, and every night for the rest of the week, I practiced with both toys. Jason and Oscar were waiting for me when I arrived at the beach after Palette's on Wednesday. They both looked very pleased with themselves. "I just told Jason that I won't be here next week. It's a normal business trip. I will leave Sunday afternoon and return late Friday evening." Oscar looked so pleased with himself. Oscar leaves every 6 weeks and visits all the offices. I knew it was coming, but the actual dates, like the duration, are usually flexible. This week will be the longest. I smiled as happily as Oscar did and reached out to Jason. "Soon you will have sex with me," I said tenderly. Before we left the beach, Jason gave me a new toy, still in the package. Returning to the apartment, I let Oscar open the box while I got ready to try out my new toy. Luckily, there were instructions inside. I'm in the middle of reading the instructions when Oscar intervenes. Oscar offered to help me figure out a difficult problem. Well, I, as a person who doesn't really know what to do with all this, thought, why not? Oscar, being incredibly patient and attentive, handled the task carefully, while I tried not to think about how unusual it all seemed. True, something about it all grabbed me in a good way. The instructions said not to leave it too long, but you can leave it for a while, so I decided to wait a bit before moving on to the next step. While we were having dinner, everything went smoothly, although the feeling of the presence of that very object did not disappear anywhere. When it was time to go to bed, I decided that it would be better to take this thing out. But then, in my genius attack of thoughts, I decided to continue the experiment again. Oscar, of course, was happy to help, and now I was ready again to do my homework perfectly. Moving on to the next stage was much more interesting. It was like starting with something simple, and then increasing the difficulty level, like in a video game. And here the real challenge began, where everything became much more serious, but at the same time very impressive. Something like those moments in a movie when the main character gets to the final boss and everything seems too difficult, but you know that the result is worth it. Well, after a few moments of concentration, I felt that I had achieved, so to speak, real success. And guess what? It was definitely on the level of those epic victories where everyone applauds and shouts, "Bravo," in slow motion. Oscar beamed with delight. Damn it, the rest of the week flew by. Excursion on Saturday, then meeting Oscar on the beach after lunch. Homework, helping Oscar prepare for his trip. I was just as excited about the weekend as my husband, and I was also very glad that he would go by train as usual. I didn't want him to be so preoccupied with what might happen that he couldn't concentrate on the road. I loved him very much, strong enough to break her marital vows for his pleasure. Sunday, May 18th, 2014. I completed my last homework. We had lunch. I remained naked throughout, showering and getting dressed only before taking Oscar to the station. It took me a few minutes, a short summer dress, shoes, a smile, and a bag with everything I might need. Jason met us at the station. "What time do you plan to be at the hotel?" Jason asked kindly. "About 7:30 p.m. Could you call your wife on your mobile at 20 o'clock? She will want to talk to you." A very happy Oscar boarded the train and Jason and I waved goodbye to him. As soon as Oscar's train left, we headed straight to the beach. I wanted to return to the apartment. It didn't matter whether it was mine or his. I wanted to take off my clothes and have Jason immediately have sex with me. But Jason said that we needed to do everything right. "Is there a right way to have sex with another man's wife?" I laughed. Luckily, Jason saw the funny side of his words and laughed too. "Yes, well, in our case, I think there is. Can I be honest with you? He doesn't want me? Is he just playing with Oscar and me?" My heart sank for a moment. "Yes, sure. From the moment I walked into your office, I wanted you. Pheromones, chemistry, call it what you want. I wanted you. And before you start talking about too old, could be my mother, let me tell you I like more mature women. My first sexual relationship was with an older woman, and since then I have not looked at younger people. If the situation were different, if you were single or just looking for fun, I would do everything possible to be in your panties by the end of the first week. You meet all my requirements. In truth, it probably would have ended in tears, but when I met you on the beach that evening, everything changed. It became clear to me that Oscar wanted to be a cuckold. This gave me a chance to build a fulfilling relationship with you, and if possible, a long-term one. So let's do it right now. Oscar is sitting on the train, and his head is full of images of you happily having sex with me. Mine too, to be honest. But we promised to keep him updated. At 20 o'clock he will call, expecting you to say that we have already slept together. He has been on the train for 3 hours, and is thinking about how we are together now. What if he's not happy? What if he gets angry because we are willing to do this? What if he changes his mind? What should we do then? We won't have anything to fall back on. Well, you said it, so live with it. After his first proposal, I was overwhelmed with joy. Absolute happiness. I barely heard the rest. Did he need my answer? Now it's my turn to be honest. When you walked into the office, a shiver ran down my spine. When we shook hands, I got very excited. I told Oscar about this when I returned home. I didn't go home, I soared. I was in seventh heaven the whole way and have been there ever since. Everything you said or suggested was perfect. If you say I need to wait to have sex with you, I will wait. As much as you like. Can I kiss you here on the street? Not until I kiss you first. He hugged me and we kissed, rapturously. We went to the beach. I received my instructions, and we played in the sea, kissing, cuddling, until I became more and more horny, and my body began to crave for my lover to have sex with me hard, making me scream in pleasure. At 7:30 p.m. Jason took me to his apartment, on the top floor, directly opposite the beach. My cell phone rang at exactly 20 o'clock. I immediately turned on the speakerphone, put the phone on the forged table, and began to caress my lover. This was not in the script. "Hello, dear. Did everything go well for you?" "Yes, no problem. Has Jason already had sex with you?" He blurted out quickly and excitedly. How did we know that would be the first thing he would ask? No, dear. We immediately went to the beach. Jason says this morning's shave was perfect, by the way. We spent the whole day on the beach, and now I'm at his apartment. We arrived half an hour ago. He took off my dress as soon as we walked in, and I took off his shorts right away. Now we are sitting on the balcony. So he hasn't had sex with you yet? Is he going to do it as soon as we're done? Are you going to spend the night in his bed? Dear, dear, take your time. Before we get into all this, we need to talk. Are you sitting? Yes, yes, I am sitting at a small table. What's happened? It's okay, isn't it? Yes, dear, everything is fine. The thing is, everything we've done so far, you, me, and Jason, has been just great fun for the three of us. I really enjoyed it, and I know you will too, and Jason says he will too. But we were just playing grown-up games, so to speak, nothing too serious or scary. A couple dozen Our Father prayers in the confessional, and everything is fine again. But what you're asking me to do now is completely different. This is much more serious. You're asking me to break my marriage vows. Once it is broken, it can no longer be corrected or undone. Once you give me to another man, you give me to all the men who might want me or who might want me. You will never have me all to yourself again. Is this really what you want? There was silence on the other end. I hoped that he was seriously thinking about what he was dooming us to. Yes, honey, that's exactly what I want. I want you to have fun with other men, so that you can tell me about it later, how good it was, how much better than with me. I would like to watch you enjoy other men, and I would like to see you completely satisfied. I love you, darling, always have and always will. Honestly, I couldn't tell if I was sad, happy, or angry. I loved this man, but he gave me to other men. It would make his fantasy a reality, but it would destroy the foundation of our marriage. It would also make my own fantasy a reality. Maybe I could live with it. But it seems that what my husband wanted was reality. Thank you, dear. It means a lot to me. Can you text me this so I can always have a reminder of this evening and how much you love me? Just a minute, Jason said suddenly. If your wife stays with me tonight, I will have sex with her all night and again tomorrow morning. I will have sex with her every day, and when you come back, I will continue to have sex with her whenever I want. You have to understand this, Oscar. Is your wife taking precautions, Oscar? There was a long silence before Jason's words sunk in. I didn't mean to rush him. Bury your fantasy or become a complete cuckold. Share me with another man or men at my discretion. Finally, give me the freedom to expect, if not want, me to sleep with whoever I want. I don't know. Expensive? I was furious. He, my husband, willingly pushed me onto the path of adultery and did not even care about whether I could get pregnant. No, I'm not using protection. I never used protection. I never felt the need for protection. You better add to your message that you are ready to accept any child I carry as your own. Goodbye, cuckolded. I hung up. Jason made us more coffee, and we waited to see if a message would come from Oscar. It arrived 10 minutes later with all the conditions, the line that I would have a complete letter in the mail at home, and that he loved me very much. Are you really not using protection? It may worry my husband, but it shouldn't bother you. He doesn't need to know that. We were still sitting on the balcony. Our coffee had not yet been finished. What do you want me to do? Jason asked quietly. I wish. You wouldn't ask, I answered timidly. I can't force you. You won't have to. Jason stood up with a smile. Get up, turn around, and put your hands on the balcony railing, legs apart. Ah, Jason and his talent for creating suspense even in the most unexpected moments. Here you are standing on the balcony, admiring the view, and he decides that it's time for romance, and not just cute conversations under the stars, but something more. Impressive. Are you really going to do this right here on the balcony? I whispered quietly, trying to comprehend the situation, which was becoming more and more curious with every second. Yes, he answered calmly, as if he had just asked if you would like some tea. Wow, this man knows how to pick the moment when all the stars are perfectly aligned for something epic. And so he begins his actions. Everything was so saturated with excitement and anticipation of the last weeks that my heart literally sang hymns of joy, and then something began that could be described as a mini explosion of fireworks. Imagine that the New York New Year's extravaganza is just a dull background for what I felt at that moment. Of course, it was impossible to keep it all inside. I screamed with happiness so much that perhaps even the neighbors decided to join our party, at least morally. Jason, a master of the art of surprise, simply laughed and continued his business with the seriousness of a professional doing his job. His confidence was such that it seemed to be part of his daily program like morning coffee or a walk with the dog. However, I'm no longer sure about the walk. And here is the culmination. I felt like the star of the most exciting film that would never be made due to censorship, but this only added to the feeling that the world had become a little more exciting. True, there was one nuance I slightly regretted that I had stocked up on precautions in advance. But these are minor things. We remained standing on the balcony, enjoying the moment, when suddenly Jason began to move again. Oh, of course, why limit yourself to one performance when you can organize a whole marathon? Now everything was much slower, as if he was simply savoring every second of this process. Of course, I didn't mind why rush if you can stretch out the pleasure. Only when I was on the verge of everything exploding again, he suddenly stopped. Just like that. It's like watching the season finale of your favorite TV series, and suddenly the TV is turned off at the most interesting moment. Oh, keep me seven, I thought. But fortunately, all this turned out to be part of his cunning plan. And yes, you already guessed that what came next was the final chord with an unpredictable twist. I grabbed my phone, switched it to recording mode, and started filming. Jason moved his head carefully, concentrating on something important, while my hips rested relaxed in his hands. Oscar, I wish you could see this. Jason's head moves so gracefully, he holds me confidently, like a sculptor holding his creation, and I just enjoy life. Oh, this is incredible. How great this is, honestly, you have no idea. Wow, yes, incredible. I just experienced emotions that cannot be described in words. I'm already speechless, so I switched the recording to audio. I have urgent matters here. With these thoughts, as if there was no husband in this world, I completely focused on what was happening. Jason seemed completely immersed in what he was doing, as if he were studying a complex science or practicing some kind of art. He had everything under control, and his attentive attitude left me with no chance to think about anything else. Everything was so perfect that it seemed like some kind of movie moment, but such films are not shown in real life. So, are you ready for the next step? Jason asked with a sly smile. I thought you'd never offer. How will we proceed next? Stop recording. Leave a note. I want to capture this moment for history, or just for, when I want to watch it again. Oh, are you also our director? I wouldn't be surprised if you write another script. Of course, I'll put your photo on the poster too. Sit down when you're ready, and we'll get started. Well, how do you like this plan? The scene must be perfectly executed. Oh, you knew exactly how to persuade me. Look, you need to think about a career in Hollywood. And come on, turn on the camera. Having gathered all my acting energy, I smiled and took a comfortable position, ready for another incredible moment in this, let's say, exciting life. Afterwards, when I had recovered and we had a snack and a drink, we filmed a long scene to insert into the previously recorded video. Look at the size, you weakling. He seems so strong and courageous. I slowly knelt down next to my lover, feeling the warmth of his presence and the confidence radiating from his every movement. His calmness and confidence always attracted me, making me feel protected and important. We looked at each other, and in his eyes I saw a sincere desire to understand and support me. This moment was important and profound for both of us. I sighed, collecting my thoughts before speaking. We agreed in advance on how events would develop, and I knew that it was at this moment that certain words should be spoken. My words were meant to be a reflection of what had changed in our lives, and the fact that this decision could no longer be undone. Do you remember a few hours ago, you said that you were ready to give me to another man? You made it clear to me that this decision is final, and that you will not interfere with what happens next. Back then, I didn't know where all this would lead, but now I clearly see how it has changed us. From the moment it all started, my lover showed himself in different ways. He turned out to be a person with whom you can be completely open. His care, attention, and tenderness were intertwined with confidence and determination. All this time, he did everything to make me feel special and desired, so that every moment was filled with pleasure and joy. We spent the evening together, enjoying each other's company, and each moment was unique in its own way. We walked, sat on the balcony, where the warm wind caressed our faces, and talked about many things about life, about our desires, about how important it is to trust our feelings. His every look and touch reminded me of how much he wanted to make me happy. It was something special to feel this sincerity and desire next to you. Our every movement, every moment, all of this was imbued with deep intimacy and mutual understanding. He understood me without words, and this brought not only physical pleasure, but also emotional satisfaction. We were together in different places, but each of them felt special because there we could be completely ourselves. He supported me, gave me moments of joy, and made me feel truly alive. I know that all this became possible thanks to your decision, thanks to your desire to see me with another man. But now I realize that everything has changed forever. My feelings, my body, my decisions, they no longer depend on you. This is no longer your territory, and you can no longer claim what was once yours. You yourself chose this role, and now this has become our new reality. You stepped aside, and this decision can no longer be undone. I don't belong to you anymore. This became final and irrevocable. Our relationship looks different now, and it's not just a fantasy or a temporary infatuation. This is a new chapter in my life, and it doesn't involve you anymore. Everything changed, and this realization came to me completely. My words sounded calm and confident. I continued to talk, and my lover was nearby, his presence filling me with confidence and support. He understood what I was going through and gave me the space I needed to process my feelings and accept the new realities of our lives. Every time I look back at what happened, I realize how far we have come. This journey changed me, changed us both. And now that everything has fallen into place, I know that this new stage of my life will be full of opportunities and discoveries. After that, we made love, tender and soft, and did not record a second. I fell asleep in my lover's arms and woke up still wrapped in his arms. We woke up early and spent the first 15 minutes of our first day together kissing and cuddling like newlyweds before switching into work mode. Jason went for his morning workout at the pool, and I headed home to change into fresh clothes and underwear before meeting for breakfast at a small cafe by the harbor. I sent a message to Cook, telling him not to call until 12:45 as I would be busy all morning. Which was absolutely true. Jason and I were in work mode all day. Cook called at exactly 12:45 p.m. We didn't talk for a long time. I told him that Jason had completely satisfied me in every way possible and that I would sleep with him every night for the rest of the week, and he, my husband Cook, would no longer sleep with me. I added that we will send photos and videos when it is convenient for us, and if we have time for this. He seemed quite pleased. The 5 nights I spent with Jason were incredible, to say the least. Absolutely exciting. In those 5 too short nights, I learned more about the joys of sex than in all my years of marriage. I told you a little about our first night, but in reality I acted like a real insatiable person. On Monday after work, we went to Jason's apartment and made love, and then went to the beach. Jason took a photo, which I immediately sent to Cook with the caption, "Come up with a good reason why my lover spends the night in my apartment and my bed, because Mrs. Orlando will probably notice us when we arrive and leave together in the morning. Because my husband is a cuckold and wants me to have sex, will suit me with other men, but the choice is yours. See attachment," and attached a photo taken right after we had sex. It's convenient when photos can be sent with the date and time, isn't it? Jason gathered the things he would need for the next few days, and we drove to my apartment. I didn't see Mrs. Orlando, but I'm sure she noticed us. I made us dinner while Jason unpacked his things. After we ate, Jason insisted on doing the dishes before I showed him the house. That is, I showed him where Cook would now sleep in the second, smaller bedroom. We took a shower together, after which Jason took a video of me returning to the big bed and lying down in the center. Do you recognize the place, Cook? My bedroom. The one that I will share with my lover whenever I want or sleep in alone. You gave my body to another man. You will not touch me again and you will not sleep with me. Save this video because you won't see me in this bed again if I'm not with my lover, and only if we let you watch. That's all for today, Cook. My lover is waiting for me. In the morning, we took a shower together and had breakfast naked. Good morning, Mrs. Orlando. This is Jason. You'll probably be seeing more of him. Good morning, Irene. Jason. Nice to meet you. She waited for an explanation, but I didn't give one. From then on, Mrs. Orlando was there every time Jason and I came in and out of the apartment, but I didn't tell her any details. This is Cook's business. Jason stayed with me on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday nights. We had a great time. I learned a lot of new things and practiced what I already knew. Sex with Jason was incredible. On Wednesday, I stayed with him. On Thursday evening, we prepared Cook's room for his return and then went to bed ourselves. On Thursday night, we made love, and it was extra special for me, just me and Jason making love, or as Jason put it, making sex with feeling. This time Jason was wrong. We actually made love, sometimes vigorously, sometimes softly and tenderly. After that, Jason filmed me naked walking backwards down the hallway to Cook's new bedroom. He must have known that this was his rightful place because Jason had bought a small sign for the door. Cook's room perfect. Jason filmed the sign before I opened the door and continued filming as I lay down on the bed with my legs spread wide. This is a sight that you will never see in this room in reality, I added to the soundtrack. We will meet you at the station. Have a nice trip. Good night. I'll definitely sleep great. I blew him a kiss. Would it be okay for you to have sex with me while your husband watches? This question really took me by surprise. I'm not sure. Does this thought make you feel uncomfortable? To be honest, I didn't think about it. I never had an audience. How is this? We had spectators on the beach. How many times have I caressed you in front of Oscar and other people nearby? 3. But this isn't full sex, is it? It was you and me. I'd say it's full sex, at least for Oscar. This is what I will tell myself when he watches us together, at least until I get used to it. Don't forget, I already sent him photos and videos. This is already close to reality. I tell myself that too. So you're not that uncomfortable at the thought. I can't say that I'm completely uncomfortable, but I will put on a show for him. Let's be honest, I like to please you, so showing that I like it won't be that hard. I can behave like an overweight girl of easy virtue. This is basically how we do it. Do you want to be a prostitute for me or with me? 4. So, what did he mean? So, stupid. Oscar wants me to be a girl of easy virtue for him, to have sex with anyone. He will never get this, never. And for you, I won't be a girl of easy virtue either, but I will gladly play a complete and absolute depraved girl with you. Do you mind? Jason grinned wolfishly. No, I wouldn't mind, he confirmed. There is a thought. We could make it very obvious that we're going to have sex right in front of him. Making love, I corrected. No, have sex. Maybe having sex with feeling, but Oscar wants to see you enjoying sex with another man. This is exactly what we will give him. You are having sex with another man. We do it here, in your apartment, and what we do when it's just the two of us at my place can be completely different. Sounds perfect. Couldn't have said it better. Just make me scream with pleasure as much as you want. So what was your idea? The doors in your bedroom have removable hinges. If we remove this door, Oscar will know that he can watch what we do in this room. There is no barrier a satisfied husband, and that gives us more time. I had a huge smile on my face, and I could feel it making my toes curl and getting me excited. Great! What if we attached a short chain and hung it across the doorway? You can watch as much as you want, but behind the chains. Jason and I met Oscar at the train station. We had been to the beach, eaten, and spent an hour in bed before this. I wasn't wearing any underwear at Jason's bitch suggestion. It worked like a charm. I really felt very slutty as we walked a few hundred meters through the streets, holding hands with Jason, knowing that only a thin, short summer dress separated my nakedness from the rest of the city. I was filled with excitement. At first, I was worried that the wind would lift them, but even before I reached the halfway point to the station, I stopped worrying about it. I was in full slut mode with Jason. Oscar gave me a huge bouquet of flowers, wanted to kiss me, but changed his mind and asked Jason for permission. I almost kicked him, but at the same time I wanted to kiss him. He happily accepted the role of a submissive cuckold, and I finally realized that I was giving him what he wanted, no, that he needed it. And in return, I received what I needed. Jason gave his permission and Oscar, and I kissed on the cheek after they shook hands. Good evening, Mrs. Orlando. Good evening, Irene, Jason, Oscar. I showed Oscar the new environment. I explained that the chain across the doorway to my bedroom was not to stop him from looking, but to stop him from entering without explicit permission. He seemed delighted. Then we showed him his new bedroom. Once again, he was delighted, especially with the small sign. Leaving Oscar to settle into his new room, I grabbed Jason and headed to ours. After the excitement of walking to the train station half naked and showing my husband the new environment his fantasies required, I was ready for anything, including sex with another man while my husband watched. We had not yet reached the entrance to our bedroom when I stopped Jason, knelt down in front of him, and took off his shorts and underwear. The tension in the room was almost physical. Every breath, every movement seemed significant and saturated with hidden energy. I stood next to Jason, and although my husband was only a few meters away, my attention was completely focused on the man in front of me. His presence attracted me more and more every moment, and I could not look away. At that moment, I felt Jason tense slightly, as if he was expecting something to happen. His warm, subtle groan escaped the air as a signal that we were moving in the right direction. I touched him gently, as if trying to catch his reaction, and felt a strange feeling of excitement welling up inside me. Everything that happened seemed so natural, as if we had known each other for a long time, although in fact our relationship was quite new and fresh. My husband stood nearby, but his presence seemed almost invisible to me. I focused entirely on Jason, ignoring everything else. Time seemed to slow down, and the only important moment was what was happening here and now. Jason looked at me, his eyes shining with something familiar, warmth, and approval. "You're doing better every time," he said quietly, his voice filled with confidence and tenderness, as if he was supporting me every step of the way. His words brought a smile inside me, a quiet joy that I was doing something right. I felt that there was some special connection between us, and it was important for both of us. I nodded in response, realizing that we were becoming more and more one in this moment. Jason began to slowly undress. His movements were measured and smooth, as if he was in no hurry, but enjoying every moment. I watched his actions, feeling the excitement inside me growing with every second. He looked calm and confident, which in turn helped me feel more confident. I decided to follow his example and began to take off my dress. Slowly, as if in rhythm with his movements, I lowered the thin straps from my shoulders. It was almost a symbolic gesture, as if, together with the dress, I was freeing myself from some kind of internal tension. When I suggested lifting the dress over my head, Jason laughed. It was a soft, warm laugh that filled the room with ease. He carefully helped me free myself from the fabric, rolling the dress down, and then in one motion he removed it from me, leaving my body naked and vulnerable, but at the same time completely natural. I felt that there was complete trust and mutual understanding between us. This moment was more than just a physical interaction. It was a deep connection that occurred in the souls of two people. We were both in this special space where there was no past or future, but only the present. My husband remained aloof, and his opinion at that moment did not matter to me. All that mattered was what I felt here and now in this intimate moment that Jason and I shared. I never tried to put on a show for my husband's attention or approval. At that moment, my entire being was focused on Jason and our feelings for each other. It was a moment when the world outside the two of us seemed to cease to exist. All my doubts, anxieties, and prejudices disappeared, giving way to sincere joy and real pleasure in what was happening between us. I felt there was more to it than just physical intimacy. This was a manifestation of trust, liberation from all internal barriers, and complete acceptance of oneself. Jason was not just my companion in these moments, he became something more to me. He taught me to open up, be real, and not be afraid to express my desires and needs. With him, I felt free, as if the world around me had expanded, giving us space for growth and mutual understanding. Each of our moments was filled with special energy and sincerity, and this made our meetings even deeper and more meaningful. Several days have already passed, which we spent in closeness, in communication, sharing not only physical sensations, but also emotions and thoughts. Every day we understood each other better, learned to listen not only to words, but also to what was hidden behind them: silence, glances, gestures. These were the moments when the word "we" took on special meaning. We weren't just sharing space or time, we were sharing ourselves, creating something that went beyond the boundaries of a normal relationship. It was more than just physical intimacy, it was a real connection between two souls. One day, after another evening spent together, Jason helped me get up. I felt the warmth of his hands on my skin, the feeling of his presence nearby. We were so close that there was no longer any room for doubt or uncertainty between us. I hugged him tightly, pressing my chest against his body. This moment was imbued with tenderness and mutual trust, and there was something more to it than just physical contact. We kissed. It was not just a kiss, but something more, as if our souls for a moment became one. Every time our lips met, I felt something even deeper flare up between us. We were in no hurry. Time seemed to have stopped, and at that moment only one thing was important: the feeling of each other, intimacy, which no bustle of the outside world could destroy. Jason carefully removed the chain from around my neck, but immediately put it back on as a symbol of our connection, which grew stronger with every moment spent together. When we found ourselves in the bedroom, I felt that indescribable intimacy that did not need words reappeared between us. There was a soft, warm atmosphere in the room, as if the atmosphere itself helped us feel even closer to each other. Jason looked at me with a gentle smile, and in that look there was everything: understanding, love, and a desire to take care of each other. We lay on the bed, our hands intertwined, and our hearts beat in unison. I felt his presence with every cell of my body and knew that he felt the same. Jason knew how to make me feel not only wanted, but loved. He invited us to immerse ourselves in the moment without thinking about anything else. We chose a comfortable position, and I realized that it didn't matter to us exactly how we would spend our time. The main thing was that we were together. In that moment, nothing existed except the two of us and our shared enjoyment of intimacy. We both strived for the same thing: maximum enjoyment of the moment, so that every gesture, every movement expressed our mutual desire to bring joy to each other. It became a way for us to express what we felt on a soul level, not just on a physical level. These days that we spent together made us closer, not only as partners, but also as people. We have learned to be tolerant of each other's weaknesses, to understand each other on a deeper level. With every touch, every kiss, I felt all the boundaries between us disappear. These were moments that left an imprint on the heart, moments that are difficult to forget. After each such evening, I felt that our relationship became stronger. In Jason, I found not only a person who cared about me, but also someone with whom I could be myself, not embarrassed by my desires and feelings. We could discuss everything that was important to us, and this made us even closer. When we finished the evening, I felt my strength running out of emotions, but at the same time I was filled with a warm wave of satisfaction and joy. Jason supported me with a gentle hug and a reminder that nothing is more important to us than being a source of happiness and support for each other. These moments made our relationship stronger and deeper, and I knew that every new day would only bring us more joy and mutual understanding. I collapsed with my head and shoulders on the bed and glanced sideways at the large mirror on the closet. Jason's head hung down, almost touching his chest. We were both exhausted. Even Oscar was leaning on the door frame, exhausted. We settled into bed like two spoons, covered with a blanket. Jason was behind me, and I could feel his warmth. This moment was full of peace and intimacy. We lay in silence, enjoying the feeling of unity. His arms gently hugged me, creating a feeling of security, and I felt his breath calmly and evenly touching my neck. I tensed my muscles slightly, moving a little, and immediately noticed how he reacted to my movement. It was a subtle feeling, but it made me smile. He was always attentive to such little things. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to be in the moment. The whole world outside the room ceased to exist, leaving the two of us alone in this quiet, intimate atmosphere. "You still haven't finished," I whispered, teasing him a little. I knew that he would understand my tone, since we often exchanged jokes of this kind, even in moments of greatest intimacy. Jason chuckled, hugging me a little tighter. His answer was always so calm, but at the same time full of confidence. "Next time, if you remember your words," he teased back, clearly enjoying the moment as much as I did. We both knew that our jokes were a way to maintain lightness in our relationship, even in the most important and intimate moments. There was no hurry or worry in this atmosphere. We enjoyed every moment. Our connection was so strong that even a simple hug brought satisfaction. As I shifted slightly again, trying to get even more comfortable, I felt Jason move to give me more room. His attentiveness did not escape me. He always tried to make me feel comfortable. This is a small thing, but it was precisely moments like these that formed our relationship. I placed my hand over his, feeling his fingers lightly squeeze my palm in response. In the reflection of the mirror standing against the wall opposite the bed, I noticed Oscar. He stood in the doorway, watching us with a slight smile on his face. He, it seems, was also captured by the silence and calm that reigned in the room. The sight of his relaxed figure leaning against the door frame suggested that even he was enjoying the way we settled next to each other. Jason sat behind me so that his presence was constantly felt. We lay there for several minutes, enjoying each other's warmth. I tensed my muscles again, and he immediately reacted, moving slightly, as if involuntarily responding to my movement. I smiled to myself, glad that even in moments of complete peace, this subtle connection remained between us. His hand lay softly on my waist, and with every breath, I felt his breath next to mine. It was that rare moment when no words were needed. We both simply existed here, and now, in this room, enjoying intimacy that did not need anything additional. Jason, despite his fatigue, was next to me. His presence brought a feeling of completion and peace. We both rolled slightly, as if automatically, to find an even more comfortable position. Jason hugged me even tighter, and I again felt his body respond to my movement, giving the whole moment additional depth. Everything was exactly as it should be: calm, comfortable, and correct. I seemed to have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes again, the room was dark. The hallway lights were off, and my husband was not in the doorway. Has it become easier? What time is it? How long did I sleep? 5 minutes to midnight. Oscar turned off the lights about 20 minutes ago. Isn't it midnight yet? On Friday? The night has just begun, and so have you. Still have some strength left for your poor, greedy little bitch. I giggled quietly. As I understand it, this is, yes. Would you like to turn on the bedside lamps? What if Oscar hasn't fallen asleep yet? It's a shame to deprive you of pleasure unnecessarily. That's just rude. Yes, but I like it when you behave impolitely. I was about to enjoy my high-protein breakfast when my husband walked into the kitchen. He was naked. To be fair, Jason and I were naked too, but Jason had a body that was nice to look at any time of the day, and apparently I had a body that Jason loved to look at. On the other hand, my husband showed little interest in my body other than looking at it. Oscar, don't ruin a day that could be very pleasant. At least put on some panties. I really don't want to see your pathetic little thing more often than I have to. Jason was there, ready to move into the final phase of our long, passionate interaction, when suddenly the door opened and Oscar returned, dressed just as I'd expected. There was a certain restraint in his movements, as if he had not yet fully realized what was happening. I, seizing the moment, carefully pulled away from Jason, allowing him to step back to give me the opportunity to get up from my knees. Jason extended his hand, helping me up from the floor, and gently guided me to the kitchen table. "Sit down," he said softly, and his voice sounded like an order that I had no intention of challenging. I obediently sat down on the table, feeling the coolness of the surface beneath me. At this moment, I lay down on my back, sitting comfortably, and joined my feet, smoothly spreading my knees. My whole posture was an invitation to Oscar, and I raised my head slightly and looked at him with a challenge in my eyes. "Come here," I said, and there was a note of confidence in my voice that he couldn't help but notice. Oscar paused for a moment, as if weighing his next steps. His gaze slid over me as if he was seeing everything for the first time, although this was far from the case. His indecision only provoked me even more. "Do you see what's happening?" I said sharply. "This is what a woman looks like who has been loved all night with a passion that you are not capable of." A shadow of embarrassment flashed in his eyes, but he said nothing, just stood there and watched. I continued, now more confidently, allowing myself a little more harshness in my tone. "Step aside, Oscar. Now Jason will show you how to treat a woman to make her truly satisfied." With these words, Oscar slowly stepped back to give us space. He stopped at a sufficient distance to observe what was happening, and I felt something strange and exciting at the same time. Jason stood behind me and gently lifted my legs, holding them close to his body, his touch firm but gentle. I wrapped my feet around his shoulders, feeling his warmth and strength next to me. At that moment, a special connection was established between us. His every gesture was full of attention, and I could feel how he gave himself to me without reserve. Jason began to move slowly, creating a feeling of complete intimacy, but there was something else in his actions: respect for my desires and a willingness to follow my rhythm. "Well, Oscar," my voice suddenly sounded, now calm, but authoritative. "Do you understand everything? Do you realize that this was your choice?" "Yes, Irene," he muttered, lowering his head. "I understand everything. I'm sorry." There was sadness in his words, but I didn't need to explain it anymore. I wanted him to understand his role in our lives. "I'm not your darling anymore," I said firmly. "I am your wife, and you yourself chose how everything will be now." Oscar nodded slowly and took another step back, giving Jason more space. It was a moment of complete understanding. Jason and I continued, and his touch became more and more confident. He moved slowly, as if testing the boundaries, and I let him take control. Every step he took was filled with care, and with every minute I felt more and more free. Everything that happened was more than just a physical action. It was a moment when each of us accepted our role and destiny. Oscar stood nearby, watching, and I knew it was not easy for him. However, I felt a quiet satisfaction inside me. Everything was in its place. When it was all over, Jason carefully pulled away, giving me a chance to rest. He was careful with me until the very end. My posture remained relaxed, and I felt completely at peace. Oscar, who had been silent all this time, continued to go about his business, immersed in his thoughts. This was the moment when everything that needed to be said had already been said. Jason, meanwhile, turned his gaze to me full of tenderness and smiled slightly. I knew that he and I understood each other without words. It was the start of our weekend, and we each got what we wanted. We took a tourist bus to Park Güell with a stop at the Sagrada Familia. The day was sunny and pleasant. The bus was full, and Jason and I were sitting in the back seats of the upper, open deck. I tried to comment on less important sights along the way, still overwhelmed with emotions from breakfast and the previous night. It was completely stupid. I was chirping like a schoolgirl on a first date, and Jason was young enough to be my son. "Shouldn't we discuss this on my couch instead of on the top deck of the tour bus?" he asked sternly. I was about to respond with something along the lines of, "We probably won't talk much on the couch," when the woman sitting in front of us turned around with a big smile on her face. "Sorry for the intrusion," she said with a smile, "but I unwittingly overheard, and I have to say, your version of a tour guide is much better than these stupid gadgets. Regarding your questions, if I may, I can note that you seem to be very lucky." Young woman, unlikely, but I wasn't going to complain. She was older than me, but not much, and was obviously here as a tourist with her son. "I like that girl," I laughed. "We're all girls while we're young and can have a little fun." "Really, Carlos?" she said. Carlos turned around and smiled. "About the same age as Jason, give or take." "Of course, darling," he kissed her on the cheek. "And you will be a girl for a long time, my dear." I looked straight into her laughing eyes and smiled. "I hope Jason makes sure I stay a girl for a couple more years too," I said, kissing Jason on the cheek. "My name is Maria," she said, reaching over the back of the seat. "And I'm Irene," I answered, shaking her hand. "Like I said," she started again. We're just approaching the Sagrada Familia. Maybe you'd like to go on a tour," I suggested. "We can watch it later. It's much more fun to talk to you, I think. Or can we all go out, have coffee, listen to Irene tell us about the cathedral, and get to know each other better, and then continue together?" my man suggested. Armed with 4 cups of coffee, we found a spot in the square in front of the Sagrada Familia where we could see the cathedral and talk without raising our voices. "As I already said, from what we overheard, it seems that you are the happy wife of a satisfied cuckold. This is what he wanted, not what you forced on him, right?" Maria asked delicately. "That's right. This is what he wanted for years, perhaps even before our marriage, as I recently realized." "And like a good wife, you refused him at every turn? I guess the sex with your husband wasn't very good. Sorry for the question." This made me smile. There was practically no sex, and when it happened, everything was over in a matter of moments. But last night and this morning he was watching. First time, and by the looks of it, you really liked it? Our first time with his participation was last night, but we have been working towards this for a whole month, with his full knowledge, no, even with his approval. We started playing on the beach when we first met, and he was with us. Chemistry sometimes works that way. He left on a business trip last Sunday, and with his full approval, we've spent every night together since then, Jason explained briefly. "And now you, Irene, are worried that you shouldn't have had as much fun as you did, or did I understand something wrong?" "It seems like the voice of experience is speaking here," Jason noted wryly. "Yes, in a way. Everyone who meets us thinks that Carlos is my son, but as you probably already realized, he is my lover. My husband is a cuckold, but unlike yours, it is not his choice. Like you, when he graced me with his presence in bed, everything happened before I had time to warm up. Then I met Carlos. My husband refused to give me a divorce. He wanted respectability, not an ex-wife. And I needed Carlos and his gentle touch. Carlos moved into my house and my bed. My husband accepts this situation, or I file for divorce. Carlos and I do not limit ourselves in any way in his presence. He never complains. I think he even likes it to some extent. He knows he can change everything. So I'm lucky because my husband wants me to cuckold him. Isn't it because he doesn't want me for himself?" "Exactly. Think about it. You could be married to a pig, like my husband, who sees you only as a person who can be called a wife. It probably never occurred to him to try to please you in bed, and he was simply pushing you into the arms of another man for his own perverted pleasure. So you're very lucky. You have all the benefits of being a wife, but with the freedom to enjoy young Jason. Plus, you get the added pleasure of having sex in front of your husband and bring him pleasure. This is a win-win situation for everyone. So, in my opinion, if the very thought of your husband watching enhances your pleasure, then go ahead and enjoy it. I think all Jason cares about is that you have a good time in bed with him. You don't mind if her sensations only intensify, Jason." Jason laughed. "If you knew what I made her do before we got to bed, you wouldn't even ask such a question." "Tell me," she asked teasingly. "The Sagrada Familia is an incredible creation by Antoni Gaudi, the construction of which began in 1884. I began, causing another bout of fun. We spent the rest of the morning and early afternoon with Maria and Carlos and learned a lot about how to keep Oscar happy while still having a great time ourselves. We said goodbye, advising them of other attractions, and told them that we were going to go to the nudist beach later. Maria looked at Jason with a sly smile. I didn't show much interest in Carlos. Before you say goodbye, Maria said as I kissed her goodbye, remember, always keep your husband involved, but not participating. I looked at her questioningly. Ask your husband what you should wear when you go out with Jason. Maybe he'll want to prep you, if you know what I mean, and Jason prefers it smooth. He might want to buy you something so that you can please your lover. Let him watch as often as possible, but leave time for yourself. I advise you not to allow him to be directly involved in your sex with Jason. If you ever want a second man, I'll lend you Carlos, she laughed. But only if you lend me Jason. Be good to yourself and don't give a damn about the rest of the world, she finished happily. After talking with Maria, we realized that, contrary to Oscar's opinion, it is he, Oscar, who is actually in control of the situation. Jason and I could only be together because my husband allowed it, in fact, encouraged it. And if Jason and I wanted to continue being together, we needed to make sure Oscar was constantly enjoying it. We talked for a long time as we slowly walked back to his apartment. The beach is always crowded on Saturdays, especially on sunny days, and this day was no exception. We went back to Jason's where he had sex with me, and then headed to the beach. Oscar was already waiting with the beach mat ready. I looked down, feeling my cheeks turn slightly pink with excitement and excitement. Oscar's eyes, as I expected, followed my gaze. He watched every movement, how my body responded, how my muscles tensed, as if in response to an invisible rhythm. This made his eyes begin to shine in a way that I had not seen for a long time. It was something special, something that could not be explained in words, but I knew he was enjoying this moment. I relaxed for a moment, but then repeated the movement again. She clenched her muscles, feeling every little change inside herself. It was a game that he and I had been playing for a long time, and each time it brought something new, something unusual. Oscar laughed. His laughter was full of warmth and sincere joy. I smiled back at him, looking into his eyes filled with happiness. Fine? I asked with a slight note of slyness, knowing the answer very well. His smile was so wide that it left no doubt. Wonderful, he answered, and I felt a wave of joy, realizing that I could give him such moments. I rose to my knees, my movements careful and sensual. I saw Oscar watching me. His gaze became more focused, full of desire, but there was also something more in it, a deep feeling of love that we shared. These moments were not just about physical intimacy, they were about our inner world, our connection that we had built over the years. I continued to squeeze my muscles, feeling a slight wave of pleasure spreading through my body. It was an almost elusive feeling, but strong enough to momentarily plunge me into this state. I sat next to Oscar, kissing him tenderly on the lips, as if I wanted to express my gratitude for his patience, for his willingness to be with me at this moment. She whispered in his ear, "Thank you for your patience and persistence. I love you so much." My voice was quiet, but full of sincerity. I knew he felt the same way, and that was what made us truly close. We found ourselves surrounded by Jason, our friend, who became a part of our lives and our relationship. I lay between them, feeling absolutely comfortable and protected. This was the moment when I realized how much I valued these two men in my life. Each of them was important to me in their own way, and each gave me something special. Oscar, my husband, watched over me with the same love that he did at the beginning of our relationship. I knew he was proud that we were able to maintain such feelings, even after all these years. Jason, our friend, was next to us, accepting and supporting this connection. We talked about our desires, about how important it is to share our dreams and fantasies without hiding anything from each other. Oscar and I had come to this understanding a long time ago, and now Jason was part of our dialogue. We were not afraid to speak honestly with each other, and this gave us freedom to be ourselves, freedom to love and be loved. When we decided to relax by the sea, I felt how the sun warmed my skin, how the water pleasantly cooled it. We played like children, enjoying every moment of this freedom and lightness. Oscar looked at us, smiling, his eyes shining with the same pleasure as before. He was always the one who loved to watch, enjoying our joy. Later, when we returned to the beach, Oscar, as always, handed Jason my towel. It was a kind of ritual that we developed during this time. I smiled, accepting the towel and drying myself off carefully. Although I was almost dry, I was in no hurry. I like to pay attention to every part of the body, to be attentive to myself and to what surrounded us. Jason was there too. He helped me dry off. His movements were soft and caring. I felt how the warmth and tenderness of our relationship was intertwined with what we were building with Oscar. It was more than just physical intimacy. It was about love, understanding, and mutual support. When it came time to apply sunscreen, I felt especially happy that I could take care of Jason and Oscar. Jason was attentive and carefully applied the cream to me, paying attention to areas that might be damaged by the sun. His concern was sincere, and I appreciated that. But the special moment was how I now applied the cream to Oscar. Previously, this was a routine action, but now I did it with love and attention to every detail. I wanted to show him how much I love him, how much he means to me. His body relaxed under my hands, and I felt him trust me completely. At that moment, I realized that our connection had become even deeper. Oscar was happy about this, and I saw his eyes fill with happiness. I knew that he always appreciated such moments, and this gave me even more joy. We laughed, enjoying how easily and simply we could share such moments with each other. Oscar leaned back on his towel, looking very happy with life. I snuggled up to Jason, happy and content. Jason and I made some other changes. On the nights Oscar shaved me, I invited him into my bed and suggested he check his work the same way Jason did. The next day, he very sheepishly told Jason what happened. Jason confirmed my words. Over time, I began to encourage my husband to make love to me. We didn't have sex. I made it clear that I didn't want to remember those nights of complete disappointment before Jason, but I would enjoy it if he gave me pleasure. Again, he told Jason what I had said, and again Jason encouraged Oscar to continue. But no intercourse, he added sternly. Once Oscar was ready and able to please me in bed, I focused on pleasing him. The delicate balance Jason and I maintained to satisfy my husband was worth all the effort. We spent a lot more time together. We even managed to have a few dirty weekends together. We took photos and videos for his enjoyment as much as possible. Oscar was delighted with how everything turned out. Almost 6 years of complete happiness flew by unnoticed. Jason, my husband, and I are still happy together. Jason is the head of the Barcelona operation. I am the head of my department. Oscar is a senior operations manager at his company and travels frequently. Jason keeps us up to date with all the latest technology, so the images and videos we send to Oscar are even better. I haven't heard from Maria since that bus ride, but I thank her daily for her advice, and I still don't know what Oscar might have said to Miss Orlando, but she is still very friendly when we see each other. As you probably know, Spain is currently in quarantine, like most of the world. Jason and I work from home in his apartment. In fact, everything turned out very well. I see my husband much more often now. We communicate via video almost every day. I know it sounds weird, but I really miss my weekly sex sessions with my husband. Honestly, I would miss Jason and I having sex every day even more. Now, when we make Oscar videos, we use our old phones and Jason edits them as needed. It's a lot of fun. We're making a personalized adult film for the Oscars. We also arrange live video conferences for him at least once a month. We use 6 or 8 phones, carefully positioned so Oscar can get the best angles. Sometimes I think our sessions might be hacked. This thought often gives me extra excitement. I haven't looked at another man with sexual interest since I met Jason, and for the record, I thoroughly enjoy fulfilling Oscar's every wish. Oscar hasn't asked me to have sex with other men yet. To be honest, I'm not sure I would refuse. This is my husband's fantasy, and I am happy to help him make it a reality. Last week, Jason received an email from the Madrid head office. Unusually, he printed it out and placed it on my desk. I saw the subject of the letter, one word, Paris. I slowly read the letter to the end. Then I read it again, just as slowly. He waited for me to finish. If I agree, will you come with me? Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.